Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. Well, now, this is Necromancer of the Shadows, Chapter 751. In the auction house, the atmosphere was deadly silent. Even Lucian, who was hosting the auction, had a blank look on his face. After a few seconds of silence, Lucian finally came back to his senses and looked in the direction of private room number 25 with an excited look on his face. The gentleman present in room number 25 just bid 3 million high-level essence stones. Is there anyone who wants to bid higher? The auction venue remained silent even after hearing Lucian, and no one increased the price of the airship. Since no one is increasing the bid, then this airship is sold to the bidder in room number 25. Congratulations! Once Lucian announced the winner, all the people finally came back to their senses and looked towards room number 25 with a shocked look on their faces, wondering which tycoon was inside it. I thought those guys were just normal people with no background. But normal people can't possibly have this kind of wealth. In room No. 1, Thomas frowned and tapped his finger on the armrest of the chair. After a moment of silence, he took out a crystal from his storage ring. Looks like I will have to make a few more preparations if I want to catch that guy, Thomas muttered, and sent a message using the crystal. The bidders in the other private rooms were also stunned, and all of them looked in the direction of Cedar's room with narrowed eyes. They all had enough essence stones if they wanted to compete against Cedar, but their main goal was the Enlightenment Stone, so they couldn't waste the essence stones on the airship. While the people were wondering about Cedar, he was laughing inside the room. Ha ha ha, I finally have my own airship, Cedar said loudly when he successfully got the airship. Evan came back to his senses when he heard Cedar's loud laughter, and looked at him with a speechless look on his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but did not know what to say. 3 million high-level essence stones. Evan converted them into mid-level essence stones, and found it were 300 million mid-level essence stones. He thought about converting them into low-level essence stones, but found his heart wasn't strong enough to say out such a huge number, so he gave up. After the airship, Lucian started auctioning off other items, but Evan didn't pay attention to them. After a few minutes, he finally cleared his mind and calmed down. Hey Cedar, you have enough essence stones to pay for that airship, right? I am telling you now, but I will not be cleaning this auction house with you for the rest of my life to pay off your debt. The smile on Cedar's face disappeared when he heard Evan's words, and he looked at him with a strange look on his face. Of course, I have enough essence stones to pay for that airship. Do you think I am an idiot who would try to cause trouble here, when I know there are many high-level core evolvers present? Evan's tense expression relaxed when he heard Cedar, and he nodded his head. You are not going to compete for the Enlightenment Stone? He asked after a moment. Cedar smiled when he heard Evan. Why do you think I am not going to compete for the Enlightenment Stone? Evan's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he saw Cedar's smile, and he said in a speechless voice, You've already spent 3 million high-level essence stones on that airship. Although it's my first time at an auction, I can still tell that the price of the Enlightenment Stone will be very high. If you're planning to buy the Enlightenment Stone, you shouldn't have spent 3 million high-level essence stones on that airship. Cedar shook his head when he heard Evan and looked at the auction venue from the glass wall. I know the Enlightenment Stone will be very expensive, but Cedar said and closed his mouth with a smile on his face. But what? Evan asked, raising an eyebrow when he noticed Cedar wasn't planning to say anything further. You will know once we return to the closed world of Dryads, Cedar said, and shook his head at Evan's question. I will know after going back. Evan's confusion only deepened upon hearing Cedar's response. I will show you something once we return to the closed world, Cedar said, and didn't speak any further. Evan wanted to know what Cedar was talking about, but he saw that Cedar had no intention of speaking further, so he did not ask anything. After the airship, Lucian auctioned a few more items. Evan was hoping to see items like Blood Soul Crystal or the Time Liquid in the auction, but unfortunately, they didn't appear. After half an hour, all the items were auctioned off, leaving only the Enlightenment Stone. Now for the final item of today's auction, Lucian announced loudly as the fox woman brought out something covered with a silver-colored cloth. The fox woman stopped near Lucian, and he removed the silver-colored cloth, revealing a small round stone that was 5 centimeters in diameter. The stone was black in color, with small white dots resembling stars glowing inside it. When the Enlightenment Stone was revealed, the noisy auction house turned completely silent, and all the people looked at the small stone, with a look of desire on their faces. As Evan gazed at the stone, he felt his mind entering a state of trance, making it easier for him to understand complex things. "So this is the Enlightenment Stone," Evan muttered in a stunned voice, feeling the stone's effect despite its distance from him. "As all of you know, the Enlightenment Stone is one of the rarest treasures in the world," Lucian said after showing the Enlightenment Stone. "The starting bid for the Enlightenment Stone will be 10 million high-level Essence Stones, and the increment will be 500,000 Essence Stones each." Chapter 752. The starting bid for the Enlightenment Stone will be 10 million high-level Essence Stones, and the increment will be 500,000 Essence Stones each. When Evan heard the starting price for the Enlightenment Stone, he didn't show any surprise. Knowing that the Enlightenment Stone can be helpful even for rank 4 and rank 5 core evolvers, he already expected that its price would be astronomical. 11 million, 13 million, 13.5 million. Most of the people who were in the private rooms participated in the auction because of the Enlightenment Stone, so the moment it appeared, all of them started to bid without caring about the price. Inside the room 0.2, there was a male humanoid figure that looked as if he was made from metal. The figure was 2 meters tall and was bulky in build. He was the famous artifact refiner of the Star City, Master Arden, the person who put the rank 3 airship for the auction. He was a beginner level rank 4 core evolver, and was very respected in the Star City. When the auction for the Enlightenment Stone started, his silver eyes flashed with excitement. "If I can get the Enlightenment Stone, then I might be able to become a peak rank 3 artifact refiner in just 2 or 3 years. Arden muttered and pressed the red button in front of him. 20 million. As an artifact refiner, the only thing Arden didn't lack was essence stones. He had brought most of his savings in the auction, and was sure that, if nothing unexpected happened, he would be able to acquire the Enlightenment Stone. When Arden suddenly increased the price by more than 5 million, the auction house fell silent. But not long after, a cold female voice resounded. 25 million. When Arden heard the voice, he looked at the room next to him and snorted coldly. "So that chicken is also here," he muttered, and once again increased the price. 28 million. Inside the room 0.3, a woman with long red hair and golden eyes frowned. A silvery aura that looked like flame burned around her, and similar to Arden, she was also a beginner level rank 4 core evolver. The woman's name was Solara, and she was a phoenix. Unlike Arden, who was an artifact refiner, Solara was an alchemist, and she was also quite famous in the Star City. 30 million. Solara didn't care about Arden and increased the price once again. The people in the private bidding rooms were silent for some time when Arden and Solara were bidding, but it didn't last long, and other people also started to bid. 31.5 million. 32 million. 34.5 million. Evan's mouth couldn't help but twitch when the price reached 35 million in just a few minutes. He looked at Cedar and noticed he had a serious expression on his face. 50 million. At this moment, an indifferent voice suddenly sounded, and the auction house once again became silent. People looked in the direction of room number 1 with shocked looks on their faces, and wondered who was inside it, who suddenly increased the bid by 15 million in one go. Thomas didn't care about the way people were looking towards his private room, and remained indifferent. When the news of the Enlightenment Stone came out, his father contacted him and asked him to buy it. Thomas was confused as to why his father wanted to buy Enlightenment Stone, because they already had 2 law formations in their home. But since his father asked him to buy that stone, he naturally had to do his best to get that thing. 50 million high-level essence stones, Evan muttered in a dazed voice, and didn't know what to say. Even the people who were present in the other private rooms were stunned. 50 million was not a small amount even for Arden and Solara. Arden gritted his teeth and once again bid 51 million. Although he knew he would have to work day and night for a few months, if he spent so many high-level essence stones, he was still determined to get the Enlightenment Stone. 51.5 million. Solara was the same as him, and she also did not want to give up on the Enlightenment Stone. "If I can get the Enlightenment Stone, then I might be able to become a rank 4 alchemist," Solara thought inwardly, and took a deep breath. Thomas frowned when the bid increased once again. He hadn't expected people to continue bidding after it reached 50 million. 55 million. He stayed silent for some time and said after a moment, despite his father's noble status as a duke and the extensive territory under his control, 55 million high-level essence stones was still a considerable amount even for him. Evan shook his head when the bid reached 55 million and looked at Cedar, who was deep in thought. Should we leave? I don't think there is any point for us to stay here anymore. Cedar didn't answer immediately, and looked at the enlightenment stone that was on the stage. 56 million. While Cedar was looking at the stone, Arden once again increased the bid. Damn this artifact refiner, Thomas cursed when Arden increased the bid to 56 million. He looked inside his storage ring, and after confirming the total amount of essence stones he had, Thomas took a deep breath. 60 million, he said loudly, hoping to end the auction by increasing the bid by another 4 million high-level essence stones. Most of the people who were inside the private rooms were regretting that they didn't try to bid for the rank 3 airship. All of them wanted to try their luck on the enlightenment stone, but the current price was out of their reach. The person in room No. 25 must have known that he wouldn't be able to get the enlightenment stone, so he wisely chose to bid for the airship. A man who was also in one of the private rooms said, generally, a mid-level rank 3 airship sells for 5 to 7 million high-tier essence stones at the auction, because they are not easy for artifact refiners to create. Even Arden rarely makes rank 3 airships, because it consumes too much time and the chances of failure while making a rank 3 airship are very high. The reason Cedar was able to get the airship for 3 million essence stones was because most of the people were thinking about buying the enlightenment stone and didn't bid for it. 60.5 million in room No. 3. Solara gritted her teeth and increased the price after looking at a pill that was inside her storage ring. If I exchange this peak rank 3 pill, I should be able to get around 12 million high-level essence stones, Solara said in an annoyed voice, because she never thought she would have to use her peak rank 3 pill. Thomas was stunned when someone once again increased the price, and his eyes gleamed with slight bloodlust. He wanted nothing more than to kill the person who increased the bid, but knew that he couldn't do anything even if he wanted. He took some deep breaths to calm down, and looked at the enlightenment stone that was on the stage, with a hesitant look on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he gritted his teeth and pressed the red button again. 65 million. Both Arden and Solara were stunned when Thomas increased the price by 4 million once again, and their faces fell. They looked at the enlightenment stone that was on the stage for a few seconds, and in the end shook their heads. 65 million. Is there anyone willing to bid higher? Lucian asked in a loud voice. Even he couldn't hide his excitement when he said 65 million. When the auction started, he estimated that the enlightenment stone would sell for about 50 million, but he never thought that its price would reach 65 million. Even after a few seconds of Thomas's bid, no one increased the price. When Lucian saw that no one was raising the price, he shook his head. 65 million going once, going twice, and so quote, 100 million. Just when Lucian was about to close the bid, a slightly excited voice, as if waiting for this exact moment, sounded. Thomas was already on cloud 9 when Lucian started to close the bid, but when he heard the excited voice, he nearly spat out blood in anger. Even though he wasn't in the same room as the person who increased the price, just from his excited voice, Thomas could tell that the person deliberately waited until the last moment to increase the price, so that he could shatter his hopes. Lucian, who was ready to end the auction, was stunned when someone directly increased the bid to 100 million. He was so shocked that even though he was a rank 3 core evolver, he still felt his mind go blank for a moment. But it did not take him long to come back to his senses, and a look of excitement appeared on his face. 100 million. Is there anyone willing to bid higher? Before the people could even register his words, Lucian clapped his hands and started to close the bid, as if he was afraid that the person who bid would retract his offer. 100 million going once, going twice, sold to the bidder number 25, congratulations. The moment Lucian closed the bid, people finally came back to their senses, and a loud chaos erupted in the silent auction house, and the people looked towards room number 25 with their mouths wide open. Inside the room, Evan also looked at Cedar with a stunned expression on his face, still trying to process the event that had just unfolded. While people looked in his direction with shocked expressions, Cedar remained silent and looked at the Enlightenment Stone on the stage with a smug expression on his face. Chapter 753. That guy must be pissed off, right? Cedar laughed loudly and nodded his head in satisfaction once Lucian closed the bid. This crazy bit**h. Evan was speechless when he saw Cedar laughing with a gloating look on his face, and did not know what to say. 100 million. That was King 100 million high-level essence stones. Evan was thinking that Cedar just announced the bid in order to mess with the people. In his opinion, it was impossible for Cedar to have 100 million high-level essence stones. Should we run? Evan thought inwardly. But after remembering there were many high-level people present in the auction, he realized that it was impossible for them to run away. Just when Evan was lost in his thoughts, someone knocked on the door of their room. Evan came back to his senses and looked towards the door with his mouth twitching. "Come in," Cedar said in a calm voice upon hearing the knock. In contrast to Evan, he remained absolutely calm. Soon, the door of their room opened, and the winged woman whom they had met earlier entered the room. "Sir, all the things that you purchased are ready. Please come with me," the winged woman said in a respectful voice. Cedar nodded his head hearing the winged woman and stood up. He looked at Evan who was still sitting on the couch and patted his shoulder. "Let's go," he said with a smug smile on his face, as if he already knew what Evan was thinking. Seeing Cedar's smug smile, Evan really wanted to slap him, but he controlled himself and stood up. In order to not disclose the information of the buyers, each private room was connected with a different pathway. Both Cedar and Evan followed the winged woman, who led them to the deeper area of the auction house through one of the private pathways, so that no one would be able to see them. "Why do I feel like you want to beat the **t out of me?" Cedar asked Evan as both of them followed the winged woman. Evan glanced at Cedar from the corner of his eyes and took a deep breath. "Do you really have 100 million high-level essence stones?" he asked in a serious voice. "Do you think I would have bid 100 million if I didn't have the amount?" Cedar asked in a speechless voice when he heard Evan's question. Evan looked at Cedar for a few seconds before nodding his head. Although he still felt something was wrong, he decided to not think about it for the time being. The winged woman soon brought Evan and Cedar into the deeper area of the auction house and stopped in front of a room. "Please go inside. Master Lucian is waiting for you," the winged woman said after stopping in front of the room. Evan raised an eyebrow when he heard it was Lucian who was going to give them their items. But after thinking about the ridiculous amount that Cedar bid for the Enlightenment Stone, he realized that it was natural for a high-level evolver to deal with this matter. "Thanks for leading the way." Cedar thanked the winged woman and entered the room. Evan followed after him and saw Lucian waiting for them inside. Seeing Cedar and Evan, Lucian's face bloomed like a rose, and he smiled. "Welcome, dear guests. Please have a seat," Lucian said in a polite voice, and poured tea for them in 2 cups. Seeing Lucian acting like this, Evan had to admit that money is the real bit**ch. Even a rank 3 core evolver was treating them with respect because of the power of money. "Thank you for your hospitality, Sir Lucian, but you see, we are in a hurry, and I am sure you also don't want to waste your time in meaningless chat. So why don't we get straight to business?" Cedar said with a smile on his face after taking a seat. Lucian's eyes flashed when he heard Cedar, and a small smile appeared on his handsome face. He could understand that Cedar and Evan wanted to leave as soon as possible, so that people wouldn't be able to find out their identity. If their identities were revealed, it was obvious that many people would target them and try to snatch the Enlightenment Stone from them. Lucian took out 3 storage rings from his pockets and gave them to Cedar. In the first storage ring, there are 4.55 million mid-level essence stones that we collected after auctioning the artifact and the source pills, Lucian said and added with a smile on his face. "Usually, we charge a 10% auction fee, but we didn't charge anything this time to show our sincerity. We hope that you will continue to do business with us even in the future." Cedar nodded his head hearing Lucian and looked inside the other 2 storage rings. After seeing the jet black A-ship and the Enlightenment Stone in the other 2 storage rings, Cedar's eyes shined like stars, and he stood up. He took out a storage ring from his pocket and gave it to Lucian. "Here are the 103 million high-level essence stones." When Lucian heard Cedar, his eyes instantly lit up. He quickly took the storage ring from Cedar's hands and looked inside it. 103 million high-level essence stones was not a small amount, and even though the auction house would only take 10% of it, it was still more than enough to make Lucian's heart beat in excitement. Lucian looked inside the storage ring using his spiritual senses, hoping to see a mountain of high-level essence stones. But when he looked inside the ring, he was dumbfounded because the ring was completely empty. What the Lucian was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. After a moment, he finally came back to his senses and looked at Cedar. "Dear guest, I think you have given me the WR- Lucian wanted to tell Cedar that he had given him the wrong storage ring, but his words got stuck in his mouth when he raised his head and looked at Cedar. Upon raising his head, Lucian saw Cedar and Evan were glowing with silver light, and their bodies were gradually disappearing. "My apologies, Sir Lucian. I forgot to bring my essence stones. Please wait here for me. I will bring them in just a few centuries," Cedar said with an embarrassed expression on his face, and before Lucian could register his words, silver light flashed, and Evan and Cedar disappeared from the Star City. Chapter 754. After giving the empty storage ring to Lucian, Cedar immediately grabbed Evan's hand and took out a silver plate from his storage ring that was engraved with a complex-looking rune. Evan was stunned when Cedar suddenly grabbed his hand, but before he could ask anything, he felt silent space ripples emanating from the plate that Cedar took out and enveloping both of their bodies. When Evan felt the space ripples, his eyes widened in disbelief. "This BASTA*D is a lunatic," Evan cursed inwardly when he realized Cedar was planning to run away with the airship and the Enlightenment Stone. He really wanted to beat the SH*T out of Cedar, because he was certain that there must be a space ceiling formation inside the auction house, which would prevent them from teleporting away. But to Evan's surprise, he felt a strange force emanating from the plate Cedar was holding, and the restrictions of the space ceiling formation completely disappeared from the room they were in. In less than a second, both of their bodies were engulfed by the space force, and they started to disappear from the room. When Evan heard what Cedar said to Lucian before they disappeared, he nearly laughed out loud, seeing the shocked look on Lucian's face. Far away from the Star City, a silver light flashed and Evan and Cedar appeared there. Immediately after appearing there, Cedar took out the Rank 3 airship that Lucian had gifted him, and looked at Evan with a grin on his face. "Let's run," he said, and the door of the jet black airship opened. Evan was still in a state of shock because of the sudden turn of events, so he blankly followed Cedar inside the airship. The airship appeared 10 meters in size from the outside, but once inside, it revealed dimensions exceeding 200 meters in length and width. There were over 10 rooms inside the airship, including 3 essence gathering rooms. After entering the airship, Cedar immediately made his way to the front area where the control room was located, as if he already knew what he had to do. In the control room, there was a control panel filled with complex-looking buttons. Cedar ignored the control panel and walked in front of a white stone that was floating in the middle of the room. After approaching the white stone, Cedar immediately poured his world essence into it, and the stone started to glow. "Registering signature of your world essence." A robotic voice suddenly sounded, and a white light burst forth from the stone, covering Cedar's entire body. In just a few seconds, the airship was registered with his world essence, and Cedar felt as if he could control the entire airship with a single thought. Although Cedar wanted to explore all the functions of the airship, he knew it wasn't the time for that. "Fly towards the dark forest," he ordered the AI assistant of the airship, and the ship immediately started to move. A map showing the location of the dark forest appeared in front of Cedar, and once he confirmed that the location on the map was correct, he immediately ordered the AI to move. Through the map, Cedar saw that they were around 50,000 kilometers away from the Star City. Although the distance was vast, he knew that a Rank 3 or Rank 4 evolver could cover this kind of distance in a very short period of time. Just before the airship took off, Evan, who was at the back, released Kazal and some of his shadow undeads outside. "I am sure some people will be able to track us down, and will come here," Evan said inwardly, shaking his head and feeling a headache because of Cedar's recklessness. In just a minute, Cedar set up everything, and the airship started to fly towards the dark forest. As a Rank 3 mid-dash level airship, its speed was much higher than Cedar's and Evan's flying speed. Once the airship started flying towards the dark forest, Cedar walked out of the control room and saw Evan looking at him with a neutral expression on his face. The teleportation rune created by Ashley is really powerful. It teleported us nearly 50,000 kilometers away from the Star City, despite the fact that there was a space ceiling formation, Cedar said and laughed dryly. Evan's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he saw Cedar laughing in a dry manner, and he felt like giving him a good beating. Seeing Evan's expressions, Cedar felt Evan would really beat the sh*t out of him if he continued to laugh, so he stopped laughing and scratched the back of his head. "I'm sorry. I should have told you that I was planning to run away," Cedar said in an honest voice and apologized. Evan rubbed his eyebrows when he heard Cedar's apology and sighed. Honestly, he was really angry because of what Cedar did. If by any chance the teleportation rune that Cedar used had failed to teleport them away, he was sure that both of them would have died in the Star City. The thing that he did was just too risky. Although he really wanted to give him a piece of his mind, he knew that there was no point saying anything to him now that both of them were on the run. "Were you planning to steal the Enlightenment Stone from the start?" Evan asked after a moment. When Cedar saw Evan's expression return to normal, he sighed in relief and shook his head. "I planned to steal it after I saw the airship. If this airship hadn't appeared in the auction, I would have purchased the Enlightenment Stone using my Essence Stones. After all, even with our top speed, it would have been too risky for us to run away from rank 4 core revolvers," Cedar said, and looked at the interior of the airship, with a satisfied look on his face. "But with the help of this airship and the teleportation formation, I don't think anyone would be able to catch us." Evan frowned when he heard Cedar. "What do you mean you would have purchased the Enlightenment Stone using the Essence Stones? Don't tell me you really have 100 million Essence Stones." Hearing Evan, Cedar smiled and nodded his head. Evan was stunned when he saw Cedar nodding his head and remembered that Cedar had told him that he would bring him somewhere after returning to the closed world of Drades. Evan took a deep breath to calm down and asked after a moment, "How much time will it take us to reach the Dark Forest?" "We should reach there in 3 or 4 hours, Cedar said after taking a look at the map. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar and hoped that they would reach the Dark Forest without any problem. 2 hours later, the airship was still flying towards the Dark Forest. Evan and Cedar were sitting on the couch inside the airship, gazing out the window. At this moment, Evan's expression changed as he realized he had lost his connection with Kazal, whom he had left at the place where they were teleported. Chapter 755. My apologies, Sir Lucian. I forgot to bring my Essence Stones. Please wait here for me. I will bring them in just a few centuries," Cedar said to Lucian with an embarrassed expression on his face, and before Lucian could register his words, silver light flashed, and Evan and Cedar disappeared from the Star City. Seeing Evan and Cedar suddenly disappear, Lucian stood in the middle of the room with a blank look on his face. He looked at the empty storage ring in his hand, and his eyes flashed with confusion for a moment. "He will bring the Essence Stones in a few centuries," Lucian muttered, and tried to process the words spoken by Cedar before disappearing. The sudden turn of events overloaded his mind, so it took him about a minute to realize that Cedar and Evan had tricked him. Those two *****. Crunch. Lucian crushed the empty storage ring that Cedar had given him into dust, and a deep red aura started to emanate from his body. His red eyes flashed with bloodlust, and his breathing quickened. Remembering the words that Cedar spoke with an embarrassed expression on his face before disappearing, for a moment Lucian even felt like Cedar was genuinely feeling guilty, and would really come back in a few centuries to give him his 103 million Essence Stones. But when his overloaded mind processed the words "a few centuries," his anger reached a completely different level. "I will kill you bastards," Lucian roared in anger, and his aura of rank 3 core evolver burst outward, destroying the entire room. The winged woman who was standing outside of the room was blown away by Lucian's aura and crashed against the wall of the auction house. The winged woman was just a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, so when she came into contact with Lucian's aura, all of her bones snapped, and her life force became extremely weak. Who the ***** did I mess with to receive such a violent treatment? This was the winged woman's last thought before she lost consciousness. Damn it, Lucian tried to look for Evan and Cedar using his spiritual senses, but he wasn't able to find them anywhere within the range of his spiritual senses. If the president or the manager find out about this, Lucian's face lost all of its color, and a look of fear flashed on his face. Lucian was the vice manager of the auction house, and the manager and the president were currently out of Star City due to business, which is why they did not show up even though they were auctioning a rarer item like the Enlightenment Stone. I need to recover the Enlightenment Stone before the president and manager come back, otherwise, Lucian muttered as he rushed out of the room. When he came out of the room, he saw the winged woman lying in a puddle of her own blood with some broken teeth, but he completely ignored her and moved forward. Because of the explosion that happened when Lucian released his aura earlier, the security guards were already rushing towards his location. In just a few seconds, Lucian met with the guards who were rushing towards him. "Sir, are you Aurig?" The leader of the guards was a peak rank 3 core revolver. When he saw Lucian was fine, he sighed in relief and wanted to ask what had happened. But before he could ask anything, Lucian rushed towards him like a mad bull and shouted, "Contact all of our people in the Star City and search for these two bastards." Lucian said and showed images of Evan and Cedar using a crystal-like tool. When the leader of the security guards heard Lucian, he was taken aback for a moment. But looking at Lucian's grave expression, he immediately understood what was happening. The Enlightenment Stone is gone, the guard leader thought, and quickly contacted all of their people in the Star City. In just a few minutes, people related to the Blood Moon auction house started to look for Evan and Cedar all over the city. Although Evan and Cedar disappeared, Lucian knew that it would be impossible for them to teleport to a faraway place due to the interference of the space ceiling formation. "If I succeed in capturing those two bastards, I will be sure to give them a punishment worse than death," Lucian said in a hateful voice and gritted his teeth. The commotion that happened earlier was not small, so Arden, Solara, and Thomas also noticed something was wrong. When they saw Lucian's pale face, all of them could already guess what had happened, but they still went towards him to confirm their guess. Although Lucian didn't want to tell anyone about what had happened, he knew that it was impossible for him to hide such a matter from Arden, Solara, and Thomas. All three of them were not normal people, and they had great influence. Moreover, Lucian thought that if Arden and others helped him in finding Evan and Cedar, it would be much easier for him to get back the Enlightenment Stone. So when they asked him what was the matter, he told them everything that happened after he brought Evan and Cedar into the private room. Although Arden and the others had already guessed that the Enlightenment Stone was stolen by Cedar and Evan, they were still shocked when Lucian confirmed their guess. The owner of the Blood Moon auction house was a rank 5 core revolver, so they couldn't believe that two people who were not even rank 3 dared to steal something from Lucian, who was working for a disaster class existence. After hearing that Evan and Cedar had run away, the person who was the most shocked was Thomas. Earlier, when Cedar bought the rank 3 airship using 3 million high-level essence stones, Thomas had confirmed that Evan and Cedar were not normal, so he called a mid-level rank 3 core revolver to help him capture them. But now that they had escaped, all the preparations he made to capture Evan and Cedar were wasted. "Can't you ask the president for help?" Solara asked after hearing Lucian. "He is a rank 5 core revolver, so I'm sure it wouldn't be difficult for him to capture both of them even if they escaped from the Star City." Lucian shook his head upon hearing Solara and sighed. Both the president and the manager went out of the Star City to take care of some business, and will not come back until next week. Oh, Arden and the others nodded in understanding when they heard Lucian, finally understanding why the manager or president of the auction house didn't show up even after the Enlightenment Stone was stolen. Around half an hour later, Lucian received a call from the leader of the guards who had left earlier. After talking with the guard leader, Lucian's face turned ugly, and he rubbed his eyebrows. "All right, just let me know if you find something," he said and ended the call. "They didn't find them?" Thomas asked after Lucian ended the call. "People are already watching over all the entrances of the Star City, and there are even people searching for them around the city, but there is still no clue about them," Lucian said, feeling a headache. "What should I tell the owner of the Enlightenment Stone?" Lucian thought inwardly, unsure of what to do. When the owner of the Enlightenment Stone brought it for auction, Lucian was very excited because the manager of the auction house was out of the Star City. At that time, he thought that by auctioning the Enlightenment Stone before the manager came back, he would be able to earn a fat commission. But he had never thought that something like this would happen. "If I don't solve this problem as soon as possible, the reputation of our auction house will fall," and the president Lucian thought to himself and shivered just thinking about the consequences. if he could not solve this problem. "I think I can help you in finding them." Just when Lucian was despairing, he heard a calm but at the same time cunning voice. Lucian quickly looked at Arden, who had just spoken, and saw him looking at him with a smile on his face. Seeing Arden's smile, Lucian could tell he was planning something, but at the moment he was in a complete pinch, so he ignored his cunning smile and asked in a hopeful voice, "Master Arden, do you really have a way to find those thieves?" Thomas and Solara also looked at Arden with surprised looks on their faces, wondering what this lump of metal was planning. Seeing the desperate look on Lucian's face, Arden smirked and nodded his head. "Did you forget?" he said in a calm voice. "Other than the Enlightenment Stone, that guy also brought the airship created by me." When Lucian and others heard Arden, a look of realization flashed on their faces, and they immediately understood what he was saying. "Are you saying you can find them using that airship?" Thomas asked, thinking that he might still be able to capture Evan. "I do have a way, but I will need your help because it is not easy to find them just by using that airship," Arden said, looking at Lucian. Lucian's eyes lit up when he heard Arden could find Evan and Cedar, so he immediately nodded his head. "Don't worry, Master Arden. I will do everything within my power to cooperate with you. Just tell me what you need." Chapter 756. When Evan suddenly lost his connection with Kazal, his expression changed, and he stood up from the couch. "What's wrong?" Cedar asked with a confused look on his face, when he saw Evan's abnormal reaction. Ignoring Cedar's question, Evan used his shadow sense skill to connect his vision with Volak, whom he had left with Kazal earlier. When his vision connected with Volak, Evan saw 4 people standing outside of an airship, which was far bigger than Cedar's airship. Among the 4, he recognized Lucian and Thomas, whom he had seen in the inn the other day. On the other hand, the other 2 people were completely new faces to him. Someone from the Mechadroid's race, Evan said to himself when he saw Arden standing with a strange-looking metal device in his hand. Next to Arden was a woman with long red hair. There was a silvery aura around her, and it was burning like flames. They found a teleportation location in just 2 hours. Evan thought with a grave expression on his face when he saw Lucian and others. Suddenly, he saw the red-haired woman raise her head and look in Volak's direction. The next second, a wave of silver flame engulfed Evan's vision, and he lost connection with all the shadow undeads he had left there. F***ck Evan cursed out loud and panted heavily. Even though he was just looking at them using his shadow senses, he still felt the extraordinary power of those silver flames. That instantly killed all of his shadow undeads who were hidden there. "What's going on? Are you alright?" Cedar was stunned when he saw Evan's face suddenly turn pale, and he was panting heavily. Evan took some deep breaths to calm down his nerves and shook his head. "We are screwed. Lucian and some other people already found the location where we were teleported, and they are most likely coming towards us now," Evan said in a serious voice, and rubbed his temples. Cedar was stunned when he heard Evan and asked in a shocked-filled voice, "How is this possible? How did they find out the location where we were teleported so quickly?" Evan shook his head hearing Cedar because even he was confused about how they were able to find their teleportation location so soon. He looked at the map that was showing their current location, and a deep frown appeared on his face. "We still need around 1.5 hours to reach the Dark Forest. But if I'm not wrong, they will be able to catch up to us in 1 hour at most," Evan said in a grave voice, thinking about a solution. Cedar didn't know how Evan received the news about Lucian and the others, but he didn't doubt him. "We need to delay them for some time, so that we can reach the Dark Forest," Cedar muttered, also thinking about a solution. "Don't you have another teleportation artifact?" Evan suddenly asked, recalling the teleportation device Cedar used to escape from the Star City. Cedar smiled warily when he heard Evan and shook his head. "It's not easy to make teleportation devices like that. Ashley gave that to me when she heard I was going to Star City. In fact, that device was supposed to teleport us straight to the Dark Forest, but the distance was cut short because of the effect of the space ceiling formation that was inside the auction house." Evan's expression turned ugly when he heard Cedar, and he cursed out loudly. "Damn it. At this rate we won't be able to escape from them." "Do you know what is the level of the people who are coming with Lucian?" Cedar asked after a moment. Evan shook his head, then said in a serious voice, "I don't know their exact level, but 2 people who are coming with him are definitely stronger than him." When Evan used shadow senses earlier, He clearly noticed that Cedar was looking at the mechadroid with a respectful expression, which means that the mechadroid was definitely not weak. On the other hand, the red-haired woman was also not normal, as she immediately killed all of his shadow undeads, whom he had left there. Stronger than Lucian, Cedar muttered, and the frown on his face deepened. Lucian is a rank 3 core evolver, and since Evan is saying there are 2 people stronger than him, then it means that they are most likely rank 4 core evolvers, Cedar thought, and did not know what to do. They will catch up to us in 1 hour. And we need 1.5 hours to reach the dark forest, Evan said, and his eyes turned sharp. If we want to escape from them, we need to delay them for half an hour. Do you have a plan? Cedar asked when he noticed the look on Evan's face. Evan took a deep breath and nodded his head. I have something in mind. If it works, then we should be able to delay them for some time, Evan said, looking outside from the airship. Cedar raised an eyebrow upon hearing Evan and waited for him to explain his plan. In just a few minutes, Evan explained his plan to Cedar, who was completely dumbfounded when he heard what Evan wanted to do. Do you think it will work? Cedar asked in an uncertain voice after hearing Evan's plan, thinking the chances of success were very slim. Do you have any other ideas? Evan asked in a flat voice while shaking his head. Cedar remained silent upon hearing Evan, as he did not have any other ideas. All right, stop the airship. This place should be fine, Evan said after a minute, looking outside from the airship. Hearing Evan, Cedar immediately stopped the airship, and both of them came out. Evan looked at the empty area around them and nodded his head. This empty area will do the trick, he thought inwardly, and both of them started their preparation. Chapter 757. We should be able to catch them in about 1 hour, Arden said as he placed a storage ring inside a small metal device. The metal device was square in shape, and there was a small opening at the side where Arden placed the storage ring. The top side of the device looked like a compass, and the moment Arden placed the storage ring inside it, the needle at the top started to point in a certain direction. Thanks for your help, Master Arden, Lucian said with a stiff smile on his face, and nodded his head. This bastard is definitely taking advantage of my situation, Lucian said inwardly and felt like crying. The device Arden was using could track the airship that Cedar had bought earlier, but in order to track the airship, the device needed a large amount of energy. Like hell, this stupid device needs 500,000 high-level essence stones every 10 minutes, Lucian said to himself, feeling his heart bleed. Just thinking about the amount he had spent in the past 1.5 hours. He said it will take us 1 more hour to catch up with those bastards, which means another 3 million high-level essence stones, Lucian said, glancing at Arden, who had a serious look on his face. Fu**, money grubber, Lucian cursed inwardly and took deep breaths to calm down his chaotic mind. They were flying in a beginner-level rank 4 airship, so their speed was very fast. What's happening there? After half an hour, Solara suddenly said while looking ahead of them. Hearing Solara, Lucian and the others also focused ahead of them and noticed thousands of people fighting. They were still hundreds of kilometers away from them, so they couldn't clearly see the faces of the people who were fighting. However, they were in a hurry to catch Evan and Cedar, so they decided to ignore them. But when their airship neared the battlefield, all the people, including Arden and Lucian, were stunned because the combatants were actually thousands of skeletons. All the thousands of skeletons were attacking a single person, but the individual being attacked was easily dodging their attacks, and was destroying the skeletons one after another. At the back of the skeleton army stood a black skeleton who was controlling all the skeletons attacking the person. Next to the black skeleton stood a man who was watching the fight with a disdainful expression on his face. Stop the airship, Lucian suddenly shouted in a desperate voice, when he saw the person who was being attacked by the skeletons. Hearing Lucian's desperate voice, Arden immediately stopped the airship above the fighting army. What's WR? Arden wanted to ask why Lucian asked him to stop the airship, but before he could ask, Lucian said in a hateful voice, he is the bastard who stole the Enlightenment Stone. What? Arden and Solara were stunned when they heard Lucian, and looked at the brown-skinned elf, who was being attacked by the skeletons with shocked looks on their faces. Are you sure he is the person who stole the Enlightenment Stone? Solara asked with a frown on her face. Looking at the skeletons and Cedar who were fighting on the ground, she felt something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. I am damn sure. I can never forget that bastard face, Lucian said, and asked Arden to open the hatch of the airship. Unlike Lucian, Arden and Solara, who were looking at Cedar, Thomas's entire attention was focused on the person who was standing with the black skeleton at the back of the army. Finally found him, Thomas said inwardly, looking at brown skinned Evan, who was standing with Nihilus at the back of the skeleton army. Since he is the guy who stole the Enlightenment Stone, then that second guy should be the person who was with him at that time, right? Arden asked as he looked at Evan. Lucian looked at Evan and nodded his head. There must have been a conflict between them after they stole the Enlightenment Stone, and now they are fighting to kill the other person, so they can take possession of the Enlightenment Stone, he said with a sneer on his face, and his eyes gleamed with bloodlust. When Arden heard Lucian asking to open the hatch, he suddenly looked at the device in his hand and frowned. According to my device, the airship that he bought in the auction is still moving, he said in a confused voice. Lucian was taken aback when he heard Arden, and he also felt confused upon hearing him. If these two are here, then who is inside the airship that is moving away, Lucian said to himself, and felt something was not right. Instead of wasting our time thinking here, we should just catch those two bastards and ask them what is going on, Thomas said in a flat voice as he headed towards the exit of the airship. Hearing Thomas, Lucian and the others also nodded their heads and walked towards the exit. Arden opened the exit of the airship, and all four of them flew out. After coming out of the airship, when Lucian saw Cedar, the bloodlust he was feeling increased even more, and his eyes flashed with coldness. Stop, he said in a cold voice, and his aura of a beginner-level rank 3 core revolver pressed down on Evan, Cedar, and the skeletons. Feeling the powerful aura pressing down on them, both Evan and Cedar raised their heads and were shocked when they saw Lucian looking at them with cold eyes. *T. Cedar cursed upon seeing Lucian and tried to run away. Seeing Cedar attempting to escape, Lucian sneered, and the pressure around Cedar increased to a completely different level. Cedar was pressed to the ground because of the pressure and coughed out a mouthful of blood. Evan also tried to escape, but his fate was similar to Cedar's, and he was also pressed to the ground because of the pressure. Chapter 758. Do you think you can escape now that I am here? Lucian said in an arrogant voice after stopping Evan and Cedar from running away. When Arden and the others heard Lucian's arrogant voice, their mouths couldn't help but twitch. This guy is speaking as if he wasn't present when they escaped from the auction house earlier, all of them thought at the same time, but didn't say it out loud. Damn you bastard, this is all your fault. If you had let me kill you without any resistance, we wouldn't have been caught by them, Cedar roared at Evan in an enraged voice when he was pressed to the ground by Lucian. Shut up, you moron. Do you think I'm stupid enough to let you kill me? If you hadn't tried to kill me, we would have already gotten away from here, Evan shouted with a sneer on his face, and looked at Cedar as if he was an idiot. When Solara and the others heard the argument between Evan and Cedar, they just shook their heads and weren't surprised at all. It was all too common in Utopia for two friends to turn against each other because of their greed. Although Lucian and the others were grateful to Evan and Cedar for turning against each other and enabling them to catch them without any problem, they were not in the mood to hear their argument. Shut your mouths, Lucian said in a cold voice, and increased the pressure around Evan and Cedar. Evan and Cedar gritted their teeth and felt as if all the bones in their bodies were being crushed by a formidable force when Lucian increased the pressure around them. Under the powerful pressure, most of the skeletons summoned by Nihilus turned into bone powder and scattered into the air. Give back the Enlightenment Stone, Lucian said in a cold voice, and flew down from the sky, along with Solara and the others. All of them landed some distance away from Cedar, and looked at him with sharp eyes, because he was the one who took away the Enlightenment Stone. I don't have the Enlightenment Stone. That bastard took the Enlightenment Stone from me to take a look, and was planning to flee away with it. Which is why I attacked him earlier, Cedar said, while gritting his teeth and trying his best to endure the pressure. Hearing Cedar, Lucian and others looked at Evan with piercing eyes, increasing the pressure around him even more. Don't lie, you bastard. I asked you to show me the Enlightenment Stone, but instead of showing it to me, you outrightly attacked me, Evan shouted in a hate-filled voice, and looked at Lucian and the others. This bastard is lying. I don't have the Enlightenment Stone. He is hiding it in his storage ring. Hearing Evan, the eyes of Lucian and the others narrowed, and they looked at Cedar with cold gazes. Cedar wanted to say something after hearing Evan, But before he could speak, Lucian waved his hand, and a string of blood brought the storage ring that Cedar was wearing to him. No, Cedar roared in despair when Lucian took away his storage ring, and his eyes turned red. Seeing Cedar's reaction, Lucian smirked and looked inside the ring to take out the Enlightenment Stone. But when he looked inside the storage ring, Lucian's face became dazed, and he couldn't believe his eyes. "What's wrong?" Seeing the dazed look on Lucian's face, Arden asked with a frown on his metallic face. Hearing Arden's voice, Lucian came back to his senses, and took out the only thing that was inside the storage ring. When others looked at the thing that Lucian took out, they were also stunned. It was actually a magazine. Top 50 Beauties of the Star City, latest edition. Arden read the name of the magazine and saw Solara's image on the cover. She was wearing a long sleeveless black dress with a long slit in the front, left to mid-thigh area. When Thomas and the others saw the book and Solara's image on it, they couldn't help but look at her with weird eyes. Seeing how Arden and the others were looking at her, Solara's mouth twitched uncontrollably, and the atmosphere turned awkward. "What are you looking at?" They asked me if they could feature me in their monthly issue, and I agreed because I found it interesting, Solara said in a cold voice when she saw how Arden and the others were looking at her. "Oh." Thomas and the others nodded their heads hearing Solara, and did not believe her words at all. She must have agreed not because it was interesting, but because they offered a large amount of money. All of them thought at the same time, and looked back at Cedar. Remembering the despair-filled look Cedar showed when Lucian took away his storage ring, they were completely speechless. Just how important was this book to him that he showed such a despair-filled look when Lucian took it away? All of them thought at the same time and didn't know what to say. "Where is the Enlightenment Stone?" After a minute, Lucian finally came back to his senses and asked Cedar while trying his best not to crush him to death. He was so angry that he was about to rip apart the magazine. But just as he was about to do so, he suddenly felt a cold stare from the side. He looked beside him and saw Solara looking at him with narrowed eyes. Seeing how Solara was looking at him, Lucian immediately erased the thought of ripping apart the magazine, and gave it to her. Solara quietly put away the magazine and didn't say anything else. That magazine Cedar did not care about how Lucian and the others were looking at him, and he looked at Evan with a shocked expression on his face. "You bastard, were not you the one who bought this magazine? How did it end up in my ring? When did you exchange your storage ring with mine?" Lucian and the others were dazed when they heard Cedar and looked at Evan. When Evan saw Lucian and the others looking at him, he looked away in embarrassment. Seeing the embarrassed look on Evan's face, Arden and the others were speechless. These two MOTHERF***ers, Lucian took some deep breaths to calm down his emotions, and once again asked after a moment, "Where is the Enlightenment Stone?" "He is lying. I don't have TH. Enough of your BULLSH**T." Before Evan could finish speaking, Lucian roared in anger, and a red bloody aura appeared around him. "I am asking you one last time, where is the Enlightenment Stone?" Lucian asked, his killing intent filling the surroundings. Both Evan and Cedar felt suffocated because of the killing intent, and it became hard for them to breathe. "If I give you the Enlightenment Stone, will you let me go?" Evan suddenly asked while trying his best to resist the killing intent. "What do you think?" Lucian asked with a sneer on his face when he heard Evan, and the pressure around Evan increased even more. Evan's eyes turned cold when he heard Lucian's reply, and a storage ring appeared in his hand. "The Enlightenment Stone is inside this ring," Evan said as he showed the storage ring to Lucian and the others. The eyes of Arden and the others flashed when they saw the storage ring in Evan's hand, and Lucian sent a string of blood toward Evan to take the storage ring. "Stop." Crack. The moment Lucian sent the blood string to take away the storage ring, Evan shouted and pressed the storage ring using his strength, cracking it a bit. Lucian's heart turned cold when he heard the sound of cracking, and he immediately stopped the blood string. "Don't try anything stupid, or you can forget about getting the Enlightenment Stone back," Evan said with a cold smile on his face. The space inside the storage ring was completely separate from the outside space. If Evan destroyed the storage ring, the objects inside the ring would be lost inside the void, and it would be nearly impossible to find them again. Lucian and the others knew about this as well, which is why they were shocked when Evan decided to destroy the storage ring. "Since you are going to kill me even if I return the Enlightenment Stone, then I might as well destroy it and commit suicide," Evan said, and pressed the storage ring. Crack. The crack that appeared on the storage ring earlier enlarged due to the pressure, and the ring started to shake. "Stop, you bastard," Lucian roared in a terrified voice because he knew that if Evan destroyed the storage ring, he would not be able to get back the Enlightenment Stone. Arden and Solara were also nervous seeing Evan was planning to destroy the storage ring. The reason they decided to help Lucian find Cedar and Evan was because they were thinking that if Lucian got back the Enlightenment Stone, he would have to auction it again, and they would have another chance to get their hands on it. Now that Evan wanted to destroy the storage ring in which the Enlightenment Stone was placed, both of them were obviously worried. "If you don't want me to destroy the storage ring, then withdraw your pressure," Evan said in a cold voice. When Lucian heard Evan, he immediately withdrew the pressure from around him, afraid that Evan would destroy the storage ring if he didn't. Evan stood up from the ground once Lucian withdrew his pressure and grinned while looking at Cedar, who was staring at him with a shocked expression. "If you are thinking about doing a sudden attack, then you should erase that thought from your mind, because my control over my strength is pretty bad," Evan said, and pinched the storage ring a little, enlarging the crack on its surface even more. Lucian looked at Evan with a hateful look and asked in a cold voice, "What do you want in order to give back the Enlightenment Stone?" Evan smirked when he heard Lucian and showed a mocking smile. "Didn't you say you would kill me even if I returned the Enlightenment Stone to you?" Lucian remained silent hearing Evan's mocking words, and just looked at him with cold eyes. Seeing Lucian wasn't saying anything, Evan shook his head and said in an indifferent voice, "There are 3 things that I need from you guys in order to return the Enlightenment Stone. First, you will have to promise me you will let me go after I give you the storage ring." "Second," Evan said and looked at Cedar, who was on the ground with a cold look on his face, "I want to kill this guy with my own hands." "And the third," at this point, Evan smiled like a thug and stretched out his hand. "All 4 of you give me your storage rings." Chapter 759. When Lucian and the others heard Evan's first condition, they were not surprised as all of them had already expected this. His second condition of killing Cedar by his own hands was a bit surprising, but they had no problem with it as well, because Cedar was useless to them, now that they knew the Enlightenment Stone was in Evan's hands. Lucian and the others easily accepted the first 2 conditions, but when they heard his third condition, the expressions of all of them changed, especially Thomas, Solara, and Arden's expressions, who were unlike Lucian, were completely unrelated to the Enlightenment Stone. "Are you messing with us?" Lucian asked in a cold voice, and the bloody aura around him thickened. The eyes of Thomas and the others also turned cold, and the surrounding area started to tremble because of their murderous aura. "What do you mean I am messing around?" Evan sneered and didn't care about their cold gazes. "I risked my life to steal this Enlightenment Stone, and you want me to give it back without getting anything in return? Do you think I am an idiot? You will be able to keep your trash life if you return the Enlightenment Stone. Isn't this enough?" Solara asked in a cold voice as the temperature around her started to increase. "Sorry, but I am a greedy bastard, so along with my life, I want a lot of money as well," Evan said with a shrug of his shoulders, and showed the storage ring that was holding the Enlightenment Stone to them once again. "My patience is limited, so hurry up and decide already what you guys want to do. If you don't give me your rings in the next 5 seconds, I will crush this storage ring and commit suicide." The expressions of Thomas and others turned gloomy when they heard Evan. Lucian, Arden, and Solara didn't want Evan to destroy the storage ring, because they still wanted to get their hands on the Enlightenment Stone. Meanwhile, Thomas didn't want Evan to commit suicide. The whole reason he tagged along with Lucian and the others was because he wanted to capture Evan due to the uniqueness of his blood. He wasn't sure what kind of effect Evan's death would have on his blood, so he wanted to capture him alive. 3 seconds left, Evan said, and pressed the storage ring using his strength, enlarging the cracks on it. At the same time, his aura became chaotic, as if he wanted to blow himself up. Seeing Evan really wanted to destroy the storage ring and commit suicide, Lucian was stunned and quickly shouted, "Stop, we will give you our storage rings." "Lucian, just give him your storage rings for the time being. I promise you that he won't be able to get away from here." Lucian sent a message to all 3 of them, and looked at them with a serious look on his face. Arden and the others frowned when they heard Lucian's message, but they didn't want Evan to destroy the Enlightenment Stone or commit suicide, so all of them nodded their heads. Besides, even if he really escaped from here, Lucian will bear responsibility for it, since he is the one who is asking us to hand over our storage rings. Solara, Arden, and Thomas thought at the same time, and gave their storage rings to Lucian. When Evan saw the 4 storage rings in Lucian's hand, he looked at Nihilus, who was standing behind him, and nodded his head. Nihilus summoned a skeleton when he received Evan's signal, and sent it towards Lucian to take the storage rings. Evan didn't allow Lucian to approach him or throw the rings towards him, as he was afraid he would try to pull something. With a cold look on his face, Lucian gave the storage rings to the skeleton, and didn't try to do anything. The skeleton brought the storage rings to Evan, and after confirming that there was nothing wrong with the rings, Evan took them from the skeleton. After taking the rings from the skeleton, Evan looked inside them and saw mountains of essence stones. Evan frowned a bit when he saw there were just essence stones inside the rings and nothing else. It seems instead of their original storage ring that they generally use, they gave me the rings that they brought in order to buy the enlightenment stone. Evan thought inwardly, and was a little disappointed that there was nothing else inside the rings other than the essence stones. But he soon recovered and threw all 4 storage rings inside his shadow storage. Well, it is better than getting nothing. After throwing the storage rings inside the shadow storage, Evan looked at Lucian and the others with a smile on his face, as if he was looking at his old friends, and nodded his head. Now that the 3rd condition is complete, let's complete the 2nd one, he said, and looked at Cedar, who was still on the ground. You bastard, so this was your plan all along, huh? You switched your storage ring with mine, so that you could negotiate with them even if we got caught, Cedar said in a hate-filled voice and looked at Evan with red eyes. Evan didn't care about Cedar's hate-filled gaze, and just smiled. Should I release him? Lucian asked when he saw Evan looking at Cedar. Do you want to kill me? Evan rolled his eyes when he heard Lucian. He is a mid-level rank 2 core evolver, while I am just a beginner level rank 1 noob. How am I going to kill him if you don't restrain him using your aura? This bastard, is he treating me like an artifact who is here to suppress the power of his enemies? Lucian thought inwardly and looked at Evan with cold eyes. All right, I am starting. Make sure you restrain him properly or he might kill me. Evan ignored Lucian's cold eyes and said in a flat voice, I will release that guy in the middle of the fight, and will take that opportunity to subdue this fu***. Lucian thought, and nodded his head. Seeing Lucian nodding his head, Evan smiled and looked at Nihilus. Nihilus, kill that bastard for me. Make sure you torture him properly before killing him. Receiving Evan's order, Nihilus quickly walked towards Cedar, who was on the ground due to Lucian's aura. Lucian was dazed when he saw Evan was not going towards Cedar himself, and his eyes twitched uncontrollably. Suddenly, he felt a mocking gaze towards him. Lucian turned his head and saw Evan looking at him with a mocking smile, as if he already knew what he was planning. Seeing Evan's mocking smile, Lucian's face turned ugly, and his eyes flashed with bloodlust. This motherf***, I really want to break all of his teeth. Chapter 760. *K, just kill me already. A loud voice rang out amid the barren land as a black-colored skeleton stomped down on the head of a brown-colored elf, who was covered in blood. Lucian, Thomas, Arden, and Solara looked at the scene with twitching mouths, and felt pity for the elf, who was being beaten by the black skeleton. That's right, Nihilus, stab some bones in his arms and legs. Make sure he understands the consequences of messing with me. Lucian and the others glanced sideways and saw Evan cheering Nihilus with a cruel expression on their faces. Hey, it's been 20 minutes already. I don't care if you want to torture him for the rest of your life, but give us the enlightenment stone so that we can leave, Lucian suddenly said to Evan, who was cheering Nihilus. When Evan heard Lucian, he stopped cheering and looked at them. Just a few more me. Before Evan could finish speaking, Thomas's eyes flashed with bloodlight, and he said in an ice-cold voice, Don't think you can do whatever you want, just because you have the enlightenment stone in your hand. I will give you 1 minute to finish whatever you want to do. If you don't return the enlightenment stone in 1 minute, I will rip off your head regardless of what you do with the storage ring. Arden and the others didn't say anything when they heard Thomas, as they were also reaching their limits. All of them were high-level core evolvers, and were respected in the Star City. They had already compromised by giving Evan their storage rings, and now he was getting on their nerves. Evan looked at handsome Thomas, whose eyes were flashing with red light, and clicked his tongue. "What a saucy child," he muttered in a low voice and slowly walked towards Cedar. Although Evan muttered in a low voice, Lucian and the others still heard him because of their excellent hearing. Hearing Evan's words, Thomas's whole body shook with anger, and he almost attacked him. "Let's see if you will still act arrogantly after I catch you," Thomas said to himself with a cold look on his face, as he watched Evan stopping in front of Cedar. After coming in front of Cedar, Evan signaled Nicholas to stop. "Just 2 more minutes," Evan said inwardly as he looked at Cedar, who was covered in wounds. "If you hadn't attacked me earlier, this would have never happened," Evan said and punched Cedar's stomach. "Arg!" Cedar groaned in pain and started to cough out blood. He looked at Evan with hate-filled eyes and opened his mouth to speak. "I don't want to hear your nonsense." But before he could speak, Evan once again punched him, making him cry out in pain. One after another, Evan continued to attack different parts of Cedar's body, turning him into a punching bag. "You have 30 seconds left." Evan suddenly heard Thomas's voice and paused for a moment. He pulled out one of the bone spikes that Nicholas had stabbed into Cedar's hand and looked at it carefully. After examining it for a moment, he suddenly stabbed it into Cedar's stomach. "Arg!" Cedar roared in pain, and his entire body started to shake as if he were electrocuted. What a cruel bastard, Solara and the others thought when they saw what Evan was doing. On the other hand, Evan's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he saw how Cedar's body was shaking. "Or, don't tell me you are really feeling the pain?" Evan asked, seeing how Cedar's body was still shaking. "Huh, pain? What pain?" Evan heard a confused voice in his head and sighed in relief. "It seems he is just acting," Evan said inwardly, and once again stabbed the bone spike into a different part of Cedar's stomach. "Arg!" Similar to before, Cedar once again writhed in pain, and continued to cry out in a voice filled with agony. 10 seconds. Thomas didn't care about what Evan was doing and said in a loud voice. When Evan heard Thomas, he took a deep breath and stood up. "This should be enough," he muttered in a low voice, and threw away the bone spike that was in his hand. After discarding the bone spike, he turned around and looked at Lucian and the others with a calm expression. "Since you guys kept your promise, I will do the same and will return the Enlightenment Stone," he said, and threw the storage ring towards Lucian. Lucian and the others were shocked when Evan returned the Enlightenment Stone so easily, and looked at him with wide eyes. Although Lucian was stunned, he still caught the storage ring. After catching the storage ring, Lucian looked at Evan with narrowed eyes, wondering what he was scheming now. Evan maintained a calm look despite the looks that Lucian and the others were giving him. "Look inside," Arden said after a moment, and Lucian finally looked inside the ring. When Lucian examined the ring, his entire body trembled and he looked at Evan as if he was looking at a madman. "What happened?" Arden asked in a stunned voice when he saw Lucian's expression and locked down his aura on Evan so that he couldn't escape. "You bastard, are you messing with us?" Lucian roared in anger as he took out a normal-looking rough black stone with Enlightenment Stone written on top of it. Arden and the others were dazed when they saw a regular stone labeled as Enlightenment Stone, and did not know what to say. They all looked at Evan and saw he was smiling at them even though Arden's aura was completely locked on him. "You did well, Alusia. You can go back now." Evan ignored the shocked looks of Lucian and the others, and said to Cedar, who was on the ground. As Lucian and the others were still reeling from the revelation of the fake stone, they suddenly saw a dark shadow covering the ground around Cedar, and he sank inside. ***, they tricked us." Arden suddenly realized something, and instantly appeared in front of Evan. Seeing Arden appear in front of him, Evan just smirked. "It's already too late, my friend," he said as his entire body turned into black smoke, disappearing from the spot, leaving behind the mask that Cedar gave him when they entered the Star City. Chapter 761. A high-level Rank 2 artifact that can change a person's appearance and aura. Arden muttered as he crushed the mask Evan left behind. His powerful spiritual senses covered an area of tens of thousands of kilometers, yet he found not a single trace of Evan and Cedar. He glanced at the square-shaped artifact in his hand to locate the airship, but noticed it couldn't detect the airship anymore. They must have placed the airship inside the storage ring, Arden thought inwardly and clenched his fist in frustration. Because the space inside the storage ring was a completely different dimension, his artifact couldn't detect the airship's location anymore. "To think I was fooled by a rank 1 core evolver," Solara muttered with an ugly look on her face, and her expression fell. After seeing how Evan disappeared into black smoke, all of them already realized that the person they had been talking to all this time was actually a clone. They were unable to detect it was a clone because of the mask he was wearing. After creating his clone using the Shadow Clone skill, Evan had changed the clone's appearance to match the one he used in the Star City, using the mask Cedar gave him. Because of the mask's effect, Lucian and the others were unable to recognize that they were actually talking to the clone during all this time. Illusia also wore the same mask to mimic Cedar's appearance and aura. In addition to the mask, she used her chameleon illusion skill as well to further enhance its effects. Upon realizing they had been tricked by Evan and Cedar, Lucian and the others wore gloomy expressions. Solara and Arden were upset because they lost their chance to obtain the Enlightenment Stone, while Thomas was disappointed because he couldn't capture Evan. Despite their frustration, they maintained some level of rationality and contemplated their next steps. In contrast, Lucian's mind was in complete chaos, and his face turned pale, as if all the blood had been drained from his body. Not only did he lose the Enlightenment Stone, but the reputation of the Blood Moon auction house would also plummeted down because of this incident. Additionally, he had asked Solara and the others to give their storage rings to Evan. Now that Evan had somehow escaped with their storage rings, he would have to compensate them for their losses. When Lucian looked at Arden and the others, he noticed that although they were upset, they were not overly concerned about the matter, because ultimately, they did not suffer any losses. Even the storage rings they gave to Evan didn't matter, because Lucian would bear full responsibility for that. All four of them had their own ways to recover the essence stones they had given to Evan. I am doomed, Lucian thought with a despair-filled expression, and swore that he would definitely seek revenge against Evan and Cedar in the future. A few thousand kilometers away from the dark forest, a jet-black airship suddenly stopped flying, and Evan and Cedar flew out of it. Quickly put the airship inside your storage ring, Evan said, and Cedar complied, stashing the airship away. Once Cedar placed the airship inside the storage ring, both of them flew towards the dark forest as fast as they could. Evan had destroyed his clone just a few seconds ago, so although he knew Lucian and others were far away from them, he still wanted to get back inside the closed world of the Drades as soon as possible. In just a few minutes, both Evan and Cedar arrived outside of the dark forest, and rushed inside without caring about the people who were camping outside. The people who were camping outside were curious when they saw Evan and Cedar rushing inside the dark forest in such a hurry, but they didn't think too much about it. Once inside the dark forest, Evan and Cedar didn't stop and continued to move into the deeper area. While moving, Cedar monitored their surroundings using his spiritual senses. After a few minutes, when Cedar confirmed that there was no one around them, and no one was monitoring them using their spiritual senses, both of them stopped. After stopping, Cedar took out a small silver-colored paper from his storage ring. The paper was engraved with a rune, emitting strange power fluctuations. Holding the paper in his hand, Cedar approached a random tree and affixed the silver-colored paper to it. Instantly, the tree began to emit a silver-colored glow. Looking at the glowing tree, Evan recalled his previous entry into the closed world of the Drades with Ashley. It seems they can open the entrance to the closed world anywhere within the dark forest. Using that rune, Evan thought to himself, as he watched a portal manifest in the middle of the tree. Seeing the portal, Cedar sighed in relief and turned to Evan. "Let's go," he said and entered the portal first. Evan followed after Cedar and entered the portal as well. The moment Evan and Cedar entered the portal, it disappeared, and the tree returned to its normal state. The rune paper that Cedar had attached to the tree turned into ashes and scattered into the air. Upon entering the portal, Evan felt a sudden increase in the density of the world essence, and soon found himself standing in the middle of a grassy plain. Finally safe, Cedar breathed a sigh of relief when he felt the familiar environment around him, and all of his tense muscles relaxed. Evan also sat down on the ground and rubbed his eyebrows. Although they had somehow managed to escape, his mind had been working at full speed the entire time. That was dangerous if they had caught us, Evan said to himself, and took a deep breath. Suddenly, he thought about something, and a smile appeared on his face. Although it was dangerous, the benefit that I received wasn't small, Evan muttered in a low voice, as he looked at the 4 storage rings that were inside his shadow storage. Chapter 762. Eli, let's go. I need to tell Grandpa Silven about the Enlightenment Stone, Cedar said after resting in the grassy plain for some time and stood up. Evan nodded and stood up as well. Just tell me where my house is located, and you can go. Cedar was taken aback when he heard Evan and looked at him in confusion. You're not coming with me. Evan shook his head hearing Cedar and rubbed his eyebrows. I just want to go back and take a long sleep. Controlling that clone from thousands of kilometers away exhausted all of my spiritual energy. A look of understanding flashed on Cedar's face when he heard Evan, and he spoke in an apologetic voice. I'm sorry. It was because of my recklessness that we null quote. It's fine, we are already out of danger. So you don't have to feel bad, Evan waved his hand and said calmly. Cedar smiled upon hearing Evan's words and flew in a certain direction. Come, I will meet Grandpa Silven after taking you back to your house. Just tell me the exact direction of the house. I will go back on my own, Evan said as he flew after Cedar. It's fine, this place is not far from where you live. I will go back after sending you back, Cedar said with a smile on his face. Evan didn't say anything when he heard Cedar and followed behind him. In just half an hour, they reached the mountain where Evan's house was located. Seeing the lush mountain and the beautiful river flowing down from the top, Evan couldn't help but smile slightly. I will come back tomorrow, Cedar said once Evan's house came into sight. Okay, Evan nodded and landed at the top of the mountain. Cedar bid farewell to Evan and flew away. Evan watched him disappear from sight, then turned around with a slight smile. Once Cedar tells Silven about what I did outside, his impression of me will definitely improve, Evan said to himself, thinking about the Tomb of the Ancient. Although it was somewhat unexpected, my chances of entering the Tomb of the Ancient with the Dryads increased quite a bit because of this event. Evan entered the house and without bothering about anything, slumped down on the couch in the living room. He wasn't lying when he said his mind was completely exhausted from controlling his shadow clone from thousands of kilometers away. While his shadow clone could perform basic tasks on its own, without his spiritual power to guide it, it would have been impossible for the clone to deceive Lucian and others. Now that I think about it, I really feel sorry for poor Lucian, Evan muttered in a low voice after settling onto the couch. He took out the 4 storage rings that his clone received from Lucian and others, and his smile widened. It's a good thing that the shadow storage of my clone is connected with mine, otherwise, it would have been impossible for me to get their wealth, Evan said as he linked all 4 storage rings with himself. Although he had looked inside the storage rings when his clone received them, he hadn't checked the exact amount of stones due to the circumstances at that time. Although I didn't check them properly, the number of essence stones in all 4 of these rings should be higher than 100 million high-level essence stones, right? Evan muttered as he looked inside one of the rings. When Evan examined the ring, he saw small mountains of deep blue stones. The essence stones inside the ring were larger than the ones he had received in the world domain. In the world domain, he had received low-level essence stones. However, all the stones inside the rings he received from Lucian and others were high-level essence stones. Using his spiritual senses, Evan covered all the essence stones and immediately determined the quantity inside the first ring. Around 45 million high-level essence stones, Evan muttered, taking in a sharp breath. Though he had expected it, he was still stunned by the amount inside the first ring. He glanced at the other 3 rings and saw they were also filled with high-level essence stones. 55 million, 69 million, and 62 million, respectively. When Evan totalled the numbers, his mind went blank, and he stared at the ceiling of the living room with a dazed look on his face. 231 million high-level essence stones, Evan muttered with a blank look on his face, still finding it hard to believe that he has more than 200 million high-level essence stones. After looking at the ceiling of the living room for quite some time, Evan finally came back to his senses and took some deep breaths. He tried his best to remain calm. He really tried, but in the end, I am rich, ha 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 ha, he couldn't control himself and shouted at the top of his lungs. Some low-level fishes that were swimming in the river were baffled when they heard Evan's mad laughter and quickly dived into deeper water, afraid that this madman would come to eat them. Evan continued to laugh for quite some time and only stopped when he started to feel a headache due to his low spiritual power. That was still recovering. Now I don't need to worry about money for quite some time, Evan said after he calmed down and placed the storage rings back into his shadow storage. After putting back the rings, he finally closed his eyes. Because of how exhausted his mind was after controlling the clone, Evan immediately fell asleep the moment he closed his eyes. While Evan was sleeping, Cedar finally reached his destination and landed in front of Silven's cave. I hope he wouldn't beat the sh*t out of me. After knowing what I did, Cedar thought after landing in front of the cave. I wanted to bring Evan with me for moral support, but it can't be helped. Since he is tired, Cedar said to himself, and finally entered the cave after taking a deep breath. Chapter 763. Eli, be confident, there is nothing to worry about. He won't beat you too hard after knowing you got the Enlightenment Stone. Cedar cheered himself as he walked into Silven's cave. Soon he reached the end of the cave and saw the world tree glowing with different colors of light. Grandpa, I am Bar. Whoosh. Before Cedar could announce his return, some vines came out from the cave walls and hung him upside down. What the? Cedar was taken aback when he was suddenly hung upside down. Grandpa, what are you doing? He wanted to know what was happening, but before he could finish speaking, swish, a vine came towards him like a whip and struck his butt. Arg, it hurts. Whip. You damn brat, you dared to act cocky in the Star City. Who gave you the guts to steal the Enlightenment Stone? In the presence of so many high-level core evolvers, Silven appeared beside Cedar, who was hanging upside down, and whipped his ass once again. Cedar was stunned when he heard Silven and his eyes opened wide in shock. How did Grandpa find out about this? Whip. Arg, it hurts, Grandpa. I'm sorry for what I did, Cedar cried in pain, but Silven didn't stop and whipped him again. Whip. Now you are sorry, you stupid brat. Do you know you could have died because of the stunt you pulled out there? Whip. Damn old man, stop beating me or I will. Whip. What will you do? Tell me, you brat, Silven asked as he once again whipped Cedar. Cedar's eyes turned red with pain, and he roared out loud. You damn old man, just wait, I am going to tell everyone about the secret stash of your book collection. I will tell everyone that you are just an old pervert. Silven was about to whip Cedar once again, but his hands froze in midair when he heard Cedar's words. How did you know about my book collection? Woo, just you wait, old man. I am going to spread rumors that you like to watch young male dryads bathing in the river using your spiritual senses. I am not going to spare you for whipping my butt, Cedar shouted as tears streamed down his face. His buttocks ached so intensely that he wanted to run away from there. You scoundrel. Silven was left speechless when he heard Cedar, and his face turned red with anger. It was true that he had a secret stash of books that he had collected in the last thousands of years, but what about these baseless allegations of peeking at young male dryads bathing in the river? Why the hell would he peek at male dryads? He is a straight male. If he wanted to peek at someone, he would peek at *. It seems I was too soft on you. You don't even respect your elders. Let me teach you some manners, Silven said with a smile that a psycho would show before killing someone, and whip, whip, whip. His hands moved at lightning speed, and he struck Cedar's buttocks without stopping. Arg, sorry Grandpa. I was wrong, please forgive. Ha ha ha, tell me, you brat. Will you tell anyone about my book collection? Will you spread the false rumors about me? Silven asked while laughing and whipping Cedar at the same time. No, I won't tell anyone about the secret collection of your books. Please forgive me. While Silven was beating Cedar, the space inside the cave distorted, and Ashley appeared there. When she appeared, she heard Cedar desperately shouting that he wouldn't tell anyone about Silven's secret book collection. She was confused as to why Cedar was shouting so desperately, but when she saw how Silven was whipping his butt while laughing like a maniac, she instinctively covered her own butt and looked at the old man with a vigilant expression on her face. It seems Cedar found out a secret about this old man that he shouldn't have discovered, Ashley thought inwardly and gulped nervously. Although she felt sympathy for Cedar, who was getting his ass whipped, she wisely chose to escape and come back later. The old man was more powerful than her. Who knows if he would start whipping her as well, if he knew she accidentally heard about his secret book collection. Just as Ashley was about to flee, Silven noticed her. Oh, Ashley, you're here. Ashley's body stiffened when she heard Silven, and she looked at him with a frightened expression. Will this old man annihilate me to protect his secret? She thought inwardly, and her body trembled. Woo, big sister, save me. This old man wants to increase my waist size and do lewd things to me. Please help me. Cedar's tear-filled eyes lit up when he saw Ashley, and he shouted in a voice that could put any damsel in distress to shame. Ashley's eyes widened when she heard Cedar, and she looked at his lower part, which was swollen like a balloon. "You brat, you still dare to spout nonsense. Whip. Will, sister, save me or my ass will explode." Ashley shuddered when she saw what was happening, and only one thought came to her mind after seeing this. "Run, I have to run away from here." Silver light started to cover Ashley, and space energy fluctuations filled the room. She didn't even think about saving Cedar, because saving her own A*S was more important to her. "I still need to complete the teleportation formation for the Tomb of the Ancient, so I will go first." "Here is the thing that you asked for," Ashley said, and threw a crystal towards Silven. Silven caught the crystal and looked at Ashley in confusion as she glowed with silver light. "I will definitely pray for your innocent soul," Cedar Ashley thought as her body disappeared from the cave. "Take me with you," Big Sister Cedar shouted in a desperate voice, but Ashley had already disappeared from there. Once Ashley disappeared, Silven turned around and looked at Cedar with a smile on his wrinkled face. Seeing Silven's smile, Cedar shuddered and started to curse Ashley for not taking him with her. Chapter 764. "Do you know what your mistake was?" Silven asked Cedar in a stern voice after freeing him from the vines. "Yes, I shouldn't have talked about your book collection and the fact that you like young male Dryad quote." "Shut up," Silven shouted in a serious voice. "I am not talking about that, and you know it." Cedar lowered his head when he heard Silven's serious tone, and didn't dare to speak. Silven rubbed his eyebrows when he saw Cedar wasn't saying anything and sighed. "Are you aware that if you had been caught by them, then all the Dryads would have been in danger?" Cedar flinched and lowered his head even more, wearing a guilty expression. Silven looked at Cedar's guilty face and shook his head. "You are not a child anymore, so I won't say anything," but Silven said as his face turned serious. "I hope in the future you will consider things more thoroughly before taking any action." Cedar raised his head and, seeing the serious look on Silven's face, he took a deep breath. "I am sorry, Grandpa. I was too rash this time. I promise that I won't make the same mistake in the future." Silven nodded upon seeing Cedar's serious eyes and smiled slightly. "So, what do you think about the outside world? After all, it was the first time you went out." "It's all right," Cedar said, and proceeded to tell him everything that happened after they left the closed world. Silven wasn't surprised when Cedar told him about the events, as he already knew about them. Seeing Silven's lack of surprise, Cedar couldn't help but ask, "How did you know about everything that happened? Did you follow us secretly?" Silven shook his head when he heard Cedar, and showed the crystal that Ashley had given him earlier. "Not me, Ashley was the one whom I asked to follow you." Cedar raised an eyebrow upon hearing Silven, but he wasn't too surprised. "Did you ask her to follow us because it was the first time both Evan and I went to the Star City?" "Yes," Silven nodded upon hearing Cedar, his green eyes flashing. Although what Cedar said was also part of the reason why he asked Ashley to follow them, the real reason he sent her was because of Evan. He was still not fully sure about Evan's true identity, and was afraid that he might tell other people about their closed world. He had sent Ashley to keep an eye on him, so that she could stop him if he tried to disclose their secret. Not only did he not try to disclose anything about a closed world, he even helped Cedar, Silven said to himself, and narrowed his eyes. He played the recording crystal that Ashley gave him earlier, and a holographic screen appeared in front of him. On the holographic screen, the scene of Evan's fight against Kale and others was playing out. Looking at Evan's pitch-black eyes and the way he killed Kale and others as if they were weak chickens, even Silven's eyes trembled. Ashley had already told him about everything, but he was still shocked after seeing how Evan killed a peak rank 2 core revolver as if swatting a fly. "He is a monster." Silven heard Cedar's voice, and saw him looking at the recording with a wary smile on his face. "He is even worse than a monster." Silven shook his head hearing Cedar, and muttered in a low voice, because he knew how insane it was for a beginner-level rank 1 core revolver to kill a peak rank 2 core revolver. That guy used his zone, but it was completely useless. Silven raised an eyebrow when he saw Kale's zone didn't work against Evan. Other than Evan's fight, Silven also noticed the shadow undeads that he had released before Kale and others attacked them. Seeing the black undeads with purple eyes, Silven thought about the shadow undeads of the Frost Wraiths that he had seen thousands of years ago, and his body shuddered. Even if he is not his son, There is no doubt he is somehow related to that monster. Silven took a deep breath and thought inwardly. He stopped the recording after some time and put away the crystal. "Give me the Enlightenment Stone," he said after putting away the crystal. Hearing Silven, Cedar immediately gave him the storage ring of the Enlightenment Stone. "We can finally use the law formation, right?" he asked after giving the Enlightenment Stone. Silven took out the black stone filled with stars from the ring and nodded his head. "I will ask Miguel to use this stone to activate the law formation of the Central Hall," Silven said, and put back the Enlightenment Stone. "This way, all the people will be able to use it." Cedar nodded his head hearing Silven and asked in an excited voice, "How much time will it take to complete the law formation?" "The base of the formation is already ready, and Miguel will just have to connect it with the Enlightenment Stone, so I think it should be ready in 10 days at best." "I see," Cedar said, and gave another storage ring to Silven. "These are the things that you asked me to buy. Other than a few rare things that were out of stock, I purchased everything." Silven took the ring and put it away without looking inside. "I will be going now. I am sure Evan will also be happy to hear about the law formation," Cedar said and stood up. "You are going to meet him now?" Silven raised an eyebrow when he heard Cedar. "No, I will go tomorrow." He was exhausted because of controlling his clone to fool Lucian and others, so he must be sleeping now. Silven's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he heard Cedar. Even he was speechless when Ashley told him about how Evan fooled Lucian and others, and even took away their storage rings. That guy is definitely not simple, Silven thought and shook his head. He took out something from his storage ring and threw it towards Cedar. "Give it to him when you meet him tomorrow." Cedar caught the thing that Silven threw towards him, and was surprised when he saw what it was. Cedar looked at Silven and saw him waving his hand. "All right, you can leave now." Seeing Silven waving his hand, Cedar smiled and put away the thing that he gave him. "Take care, Grandpa," Cedar said and started to run out of the cave. "You don't have to worry. I won't tell anyone that you like to peep at young male Draids." This scoundrel. Silven's mouth twitched when he heard Cedar, and he shook his head. He looked at the Enlightenment Stone in his hand and disappeared from the cave. Chapter 765. In the living room, Evan slowly opened his eyes. He looked out of the house from the glass window and saw the sun was already high in the sky, indicating it was already noon. He looked at the time and was surprised to see that he had slept for more than 16 hours. "It seems my mind was more exhausted than I thought after controlling that clone," Evan muttered and stood up from the couch he was sleeping on. He first took a long bath, and after eating something, he sat down in the garden of the house. The beautiful flowers of the garden swayed in the air, and their fragrance covered the surroundings. Evan inhaled the sweet fragrance of the flowers, and thought about the next things that he needed to do. He knew that the tomb of the ancient would open in around 3 months. And he was around 90% certain that he would be able to enter the tomb with Cedar and the other Draids. Before the tomb opens, Evan wanted to reach the mid-level rank 1 and increase his understanding of the void energy, so that he can make his domain in the future. On top of that, he wanted to create some rank 2 shadow undeads as well. But now that he knows he can only turn people who are 2 levels above him at most into the shadow undeads, he planned to break through to mid-level rank 1. Before thinking about making new shadow undeads. After becoming a mid-level rank 1 core evolver, he would be able to turn beginner level rank 2 core evolvers into shadow undeads. In the Tomb of the Ancient, only people who are peak rank 2 or below can enter, so Evan had enough confidence that he would be able to handle them without much problem. After creating some beginner level rank 2 shadow undeads, for the time being, I should cultivate in the essence formation room to increase the rank of my core to mid-level as soon as possible, Evan muttered as he looked at the bright blue sky. I can put aside my void energy for some time, as I will use the Enlightenment Stone to increase its level once they complete the law formation. Although Evan didn't know much about Silven and others, he was at least certain that they would allow him to use the law formation with other Draids, after knowing how he helped Cedar escape from Lucian and others. If nothing goes wrong, I should be able to reach mid-level rank 1 in 1 month using the Essence Gathering Room, Evan said and stretched his body. He needs to train his body as well, so that he can increase all of his stat points to their maximum limit. But Evan had a different plan in his mind to increase his stat points. As Evan was thinking about things that he needed to do, he suddenly felt something and noticed Cedar's presence coming closer to his location. In just a few seconds, Cedar landed in the garden and walked towards him with a smile on his face. Evan also smiled upon seeing Cedar, but a puzzled expression crossed his face when he noticed Cedar's waist. "What's wrong with your lower body? How did your normal waist turn into a busty booty in just a single day?" Cedar's entire body stiffened upon hearing Evan's question, and a bitter look flashed in his eyes. "I will definitely spread the rumors about that old man," Cedar thought inwardly, and sat down beside Evan with a sore look on his face. "Grandpa Silven punished me because of what I did in the Star City," he said after sitting down. While whipping his butt, Silven had used a little bit of the power of laws. Because of the law power, even potions couldn't heal his butt instantly. It would take him at least 10 days or more to heal his busty booty. Evan looked at Cedar's overgrown waist, and felt this punishment was a bit strange. Maybe Dryads have a strange concept of punishments, he thought, and decided to ignore it. "I asked Grandpa Silven about the law formation. According to him, it should be ready in 10 days at most." 10 days? Evan raised an eyebrow upon hearing Cedar and looked at him in surprise. "Isn't the law formation a very high-level formation that can even help rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers? I thought it would take at least 1 or 2 months to build such a high-level formation." "I also thought the same," Cedar smiled upon hearing Evan. "But we already have the base of the law formation ready, and we just need to connect the Enlightenment Stone with it. So it wouldn't take long before we'll be able to use the law formation." Hearing Cedar, Evan thought about the incomplete law formation that was in his house, and nodded in understanding. Suddenly, he thought about something and asked with interest, "Can multiple people use the law formation at the same time?" "Generally, it's not recommended because the effect of the law formation will reduce if multiple people use it simultaneously," but Cedar said and showed a smug smile. "The Enlightenment Stone we stole is quite big, so it won't be a problem for 10 people to use the formation at the same time, without reducing its effect." 10 people? Evan was greatly surprised upon hearing that 10 people would be able to use the formation at the same time, without reducing its effect. Honestly, he had thought that only one person would be able to use the law formation at a time. "By the way, since we were the ones who brought the Enlightenment Stone, we will be able to use the formation without any problem," Cedar added in a delightful voice. He was quite excited because he would be able to increase his power using the law formation before entering the Tomb of the Ancient. Evan also smiled upon hearing Cedar, but he was still planning to increase the rank of his core to mid-level before thinking about using the law formation. For other beginner-level rank 1 core evolvers, it might be more beneficial to increase their understanding of conceptual energy and create their domain, instead of increasing the rank of their core first. But for Evan, the rank of his core was more important. By increasing the rank of his core, he would be able to create rank 2 shadow undeads, and they would be more helpful to him in the Tomb of the Ancient. As Evan was thinking about his core, Cedar suddenly took out something from his storage ring and placed it in front of him. "Grandpa Silven asked me to give this to you," he said after placing the item in front of Evan. Evan looked at the object Cedar had placed in front of him and saw it was a palm-sized silver-colored stone. When Evan saw the silver-colored stone, his eyes opened wide in shock. He picked up the stone and its details appeared in front of him. Space Stone, mid-level. A rare artifact refining material that can be found only in places filled with a higher level of space energy. "A mid-level space stone," Evan said and looked at Cedar with a stunned expression. The space stone that he had seen in the Star City was just a low-level space stone, but its price was still 50,000 high-level essence stones. However, the space stone that Cedar had just given him was a mid-level space stone, so he couldn't even fathom its price. Space stones were already very rare, so he was sure that the value of a mid-level space stone was definitely very high. "Did you tell him that I needed the space stone?" Evan asked after coming back to his senses. Cedar shook his head upon hearing Evan and explained how Ashley had secretly followed them to the Star City in order to protect them. Evan raised an eyebrow upon hearing that Ashley had followed them to the Star City, but he didn't care too much about it, because he could already guess why she was following them. So she was the one who told Silven about it. Evan thought inwardly as he looked at the space stone in his hand. Now I only need blood soul crystals and the time liquid, he said to himself, and put away the space stone. Please thank Grandpa Silven on my behalf, Evan said to Cedar after putting away the space stone. Sure, Cedar nodded his head upon hearing Evan, and they talked for a few more hours. After some time, Cedar left, and Evan walked towards the Essence Formation room. During their conversation, he told Cedar that he is planning to try to reach mid-level rank 1 in the following month. So he doesn't need to worry about him, and he can focus on his own cultivation. Cedar was surprised when he heard Evan was planning to increase the rank of his core instead of using the law formation. He advised him to focus on creating his domain first. But when Evan said he had his own reasons to prioritize the rank of his core, Cedar did not ask anything and told him to contact him if he needed anything. Soon Evan reached in front of Essence Formation room and took a deep breath. Let's try to reach mid-level in 1 month, he muttered and entered the Essence Formation room. 1 month passed in the blink of an eye, and Evan spent most of his time in the Essence Formation room trying to reach mid-level rank 1. But even after giving his best, he wasn't able to reach mid-level in 1 month because he encountered an unexpected problem. Chapter 766. Damn it. It's not enough, Evan said as he emerged from the Essence Formation room. It had been 1 month since he started cultivating in the Essence Formation room. The aura surrounding him was slightly stronger than it was a month ago, but he was still far from reaching mid-level rank 1. I thought I would reach mid-level rank 1 in 1 month, but I'm still at the 68% mark and need to fill the remaining 32% before I can advance, Evan muttered and sighed after leaving the room. Initially, Evan's core progressed smoothly, but once his core crossed the 50% mark of the beginner level rank 1, its progress slowed down considerably. After reaching the 50% mark, the energy that his core required for further advancement nearly tripled. This sudden increase in required energy slowed down his core's progress, even though he was cultivating in the Essence Formation room. I don't know the level of this formation, but it can't keep up with the amount of world essence that my core needs, Evan muttered to himself as he took out a crystal from his storage ring. Using the crystal, he contacted Cedar. After a few hours, Cedar arrived at Evan's house, and Evan noticed that his aura was significantly stronger than before. He wasn't surprised to see the improvement in Cedar's power. The law formation had been completed around 20 days ago, and Cedar had been cultivating using it during all this time. Although he was still a mid-level rank 2 core evolver, the power of his zone had greatly increased after cultivating in the law formation for nearly 1 month. You are finally out, Cedar said with a smile on his face seeing Evan. He was in a good mood because his zone had progressed quite a bit due to the law formation. Evan nodded his head upon hearing Cedar and sighed. Hey Cedar, what is the rank of the essence gathering formation in my house? Cedar was taken aback when he heard Evan's question, and only now did he notice that Evan was still a beginner level rank 1 core evolver even after a month. It's a peak rank 2 formation. Is it broken? He asked while raising an eyebrow. In his opinion, there shouldn't be any problem for Evan to reach mid-level in a month using that formation unless it was broken. It's not broken, but Evan said and smiled warily. That peak rank 2 formation is not enough for me. Not enough for you. Cedar was dumbfounded when he heard Evan. What do you mean it's not? And Cedar suddenly stopped midway as a possibility came into his mind. Don't tell me, he muttered and looked at Evan with a shocked expression on his face. What? Evan asked in a confused voice, not understanding why Cedar was reacting like this. Cedar took some deep breaths to calm down and asked after a moment, don't tell me the amount of world essence that the formation gathers can't keep up with the absorption rate of your core. Evan raised an eyebrow in surprise upon hearing Cedar and nodded his head. You are right, my core absorbs the world essence faster than the formation can gather, and even though it is absorbing the world essence like a black hole, its progress is very slow, Evan said, and rubbed his eyebrows in frustration. If I continue to cultivate like this, it will take me around 1 more month to reach the mid-level of rank 1. You monster, Cedar said with a twitching mouth when he heard Evan and felt like beating him. Generally, people with high talent absorb the world essence faster than other evolvers, and they need more world essence to advance to the next rank. It is because of the high potential of their core that they need a large amount of world essence in order to progress. When Cedar was a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, He also needed a large amount of world essence compared to other normal core evolvers. While he was a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, he could cultivate in a mid-level rank 2 essence gathering formation. Once, he tried to cultivate in a peak rank 2 essence gathering formation, but his body almost exploded due to the high amount of essence that the formation was gathering around him. His core wasn't able to absorb all the world essence that the formation was gathering, and it almost killed him. He was already quite impressed with Evan after learning he could cultivate in a peak rank 2 formation while being a beginner level rank 1 core evolver. But now he is saying this formation is not enough for him. Is this guy trying to break my self-confidence? Cedar thought with a twitching mouth, and felt Silven had lied to him when he told him that he was a genius. Is there any other place where the density of the world essence is higher? I don't want to spend another month cooped up in this room, as I want to reach mid-level rank 1 as soon as possible, Evan said to Cedar. Cedar took some deep breaths to calm down, and after a moment his mind finally returned to normal. You can use the essence gathering rooms with higher level formations that are located in the central hall, but Cedar said and smiled slightly. Do you remember in the auction house I told you I would show you a place once we return to the closed world? Evan raised an eyebrow in surprise upon hearing Cedar and nodded his head. When Cedar bought the airship using 3 million higher level essence stones, Evan had asked him if he had gone insane. At that time, Cedar told him that he would show him a place once they returned to the closed world, and he would understand everything. Can this place help me advance faster? Evan asked after a moment. Cedar smiled when he heard Evan and flew out of his house. You will understand when we get there. Evan also left the house and followed after Cedar. After leaving the house, both of them turned into streaks of light and flew at lightning speed. Around 6 hours later, Evan and Cedar were flying above a forest. While flying, Evan noticed that the density of the world essence in the surrounding area was decreasing, which surprised him greatly. Evan had noticed that the density of the world essence in the closed world of the Dryads was higher than the outside world. He was always curious because of this fact, but he never got a chance to ask why the density of the world essence was higher in the closed world. Now that he had nothing else to do other than follow Cedar, he finally asked him about this with a curious look on his face. The density of the world essence is very high in the closed world because of the world tree, Cedar said and explained. This world was created using the power of the world tree, and the world tree can produce a large amount of pure world essence without any problem. Every day, the world tree produces pure world essence and channels it throughout the closed world, which is why the density of world essence here never decreases, and is actually increasing little by little every day. World tree again. Evan said inwardly and felt this world tree is an all-rounder. It can help core evolvers evolve their cores without the need for the source pill. It can create hidden world, and now it can even produce pure world essence. Seeing the surprised look on Evan's face, Cedar smiled bitterly. The world tree can actually do many other things, but its powers are currently sealed. Evan was stunned when he heard Cedar and looked at him in shock. What do you mean its powers are sealed? It is already quite absurd that the world tree can create a hidden world and help the Dryads to this degree. But now Cedar is saying the powers of the world tree are actually sealed. Don't tell me this world tree is the real protagonist of this world. Evan thought with a speechless look on his face. Cedar sighed when he heard Evan's question and looked around him with a complicated expression. You will soon understand what I mean, he said and flew deeper into the forest. Evan didn't ask anything seeing the gloomy look on Cedar's face, and followed him into the forest. The deeper Evan flew into the forest, the more he noticed how the density of the world essence was decreasing. 2 hours later, the trees of the forest started to disappear, and a barren land appeared in Evan's view. It was the first time Evan had seen barren land inside the closed world of Dryads, so he was quite surprised when he saw this. Additionally, Evan noticed that there was no world essence in the surroundings of the barren land. What is this place? Evan couldn't help but ask when he saw that the surroundings of the barren land were completely devoid of world essence. Look there, that is our destination, Cedar said and pointed in front of them, where Evan could see the outline of a small structure. The structure was not very far from Evan and Cedar, but the area around the structure was filled with a strange kind of power which obstructed their vision, making it difficult to see anything around it clearly. Evan narrowed his eyes when he saw the outline of the structure, and for some reason, his heart, which was covered in the outline of the Rune of Origin, started to beat faster. Chapter 767. What's this strange feeling? Evan frowned when he felt his heart beating abnormally fast, after seeing the outline of the structure. Could it be? Suddenly, he thought about something and opened his status window. Heart of Origin. Because of the Heart of Origin, the path to Origin is now open for you. When Evan became a rank 1 core evolver, he had acquired something called the Heart of Origin. Even now, he didn't know anything about the Heart of Origin, as its description was quite strange. Could it be that the feeling I am getting is somehow related to this so-called path to Origin? Evan thought inwardly and narrowed his eyes. He looked at Cedar, who was flying beside him, and after a moment decided to ask him, "Hey Cedar, have you ever heard about the Heart of Origin?" Heart of Origin. Cedar looked at Evan in confusion and shook his head. As expected, he doesn't know anything. Evan wasn't surprised when he saw Cedar shake his head, as he was already expecting that he would not know anything about the Heart of Origin. The Heart of Origin is something that he received because of the Rune of Origin, and the Rune of Origin is related to his Growth Link skill. Unless people are aware of the Growth Link skill, it is simply impossible for them to know anything about the Heart of Origin. After a few minutes of flying, Evan and Cedar were just a few kilometers away from the structure. At this point, Evan suddenly sensed a surging spiritual power, and felt someone was looking at them using their spiritual senses. Feeling the surging spiritual power, Evan's body stiffened, and the primordial shadow energy inside his body started to flow throughout his body, bringing his body to optimal condition for a fight. "Don't worry. This spiritual power belongs to the guardian of this place," Cedar said in a calm voice when he saw Evan's battle-ready face. Hearing Cedar, Evan was taken aback, and the surging energy within his body calmed down. "A guardian? Is there a high-rank artifact or something in this place?" Evan asked, thinking there might be an artifact or treasure in this barren land that the person who was looking at them using the spiritual senses was guarding. "There is something even more precious than an artifact in this place," Cedar said, and suddenly Evan felt as if he passed through a barrier. The moment he felt he passed through the barrier, the surroundings around him changed, and the strange power that was obstructing his vision completely disappeared. As the strange power obstructing his vision disappeared, Evan finally saw the complete form of the structure. "Is this an ant nest?" he asked in a baffled voice as he looked at the pyramid structure in front of him, resembling an ant nest, and filled with hundreds of human-sized holes. "It's not an ant nest," Cedar said with a twitching mouth when he heard Evan, and both of them landed some distance away from the structure. The spiritual power that Evan felt earlier was still locked down on them, and the pressure it exerted on them increased as they inched closer to the ant nest-like structure. After landing on the ground, Cedar didn't move forward and took out a palm-sized token from his storage ring. From the token, Evan felt Silven's aura emanating. The spiritual power that was locked down on them scanned the token that Cedar took out, and after scanning the token, it completely disappeared. "The spiritual power that I just felt was weaker than Ashley's, but more powerful than Arden and Solara. So this guardian should be a mid-level or peak rank 4 evolver," Evan thought to himself once the spiritual power locked on them disappeared. "Let's go." Cedar put away the token he had taken out once the spiritual power disappeared, and walked towards one of the caves located in the ant nest-like structure. Evan followed behind Cedar, and the closer he got to the structure, the more his heart beat in excitement. The surroundings around them were still devoid of world essence, but Evan could feel rich world essence filling every cave located in the structure. "Since you are still a beginner-level rank 1 core evolver, I think a low-level essence stone mine should be enough for you," Cedar said, and stopped in front of one of the caves located in the structure. "Low-level mine?" Evan raised an eyebrow upon hearing Cedar, and looked at the cave in front of him with a surprised expression. "Yes, all of these caves are essence stone mines, and are the best places you can find to cultivate," Cedar said, pointing at the cave in front of him. "It is a low-level essence stone mine, but don't underestimate the density and the amount of world essence inside it just because it is a low-level mine. Even normal peak rank 2 core evolvers find it difficult to handle the overflowing amount of world essence inside the low-level mines. Since it is a low-level mine, does it mean there are mid and peak level mines as well?" Evan asked, looking at the other caves in the structure. "Yes," Cedar nodded and pointed to different areas of the structure. All the caves located in the middle area of the structure are the mid-level essence stone mines, and the caves located above them are the peak-level mines. Cedar looked at Evan after explaining about the caves and said calmly, "You can take a look at those high-level caves, but you can stay there for just a few minutes at best, as your body won't be able to handle the high amount of world essence inside them." Evan nodded upon hearing Cedar's advice. As he surveyed the caves, his gaze landed on the cave located at the topmost area. This cave appeared smaller than the others, and surprisingly, its entrance was closed, unlike the other open caves. When he looked at that cave, Evan felt his heart racing like a bullet train. It was as if something inside that cave was calling out to him. "Hey Cedar, what about that cave? Is it also an essence stone mine?" he asked, pointing towards the closed cave. Cedar glanced at the cave Evan was pointing at and shook his head. "It is not an essence stone mine. That place is the center of this closed world. It is the place from where the world tree channels the world essence throughout the closed world to maintain its stability," he said, and added after a moment, "I have never been there because according to Grandpa Silven, even a peak rank 4 core evolver can't handle the density of the world essence in that place." "Center of the closed world," Evan muttered, looking at the closed entrance with narrowed eyes. "Is there something inside that cave related to the Heart of Origin?" he thought, feeling the strange excitement emanating from his heart. Suddenly, Cedar seemed to remember something, and he said in an uncertain voice, "Although I'm not sure, I once heard that the world core of this closed world is also located inside that cave." The moment Evan heard the words world core, the beating of his heart increased even more. Chapter 768. You got all the essence stones that you spent in the Star City from these mines, right? Evan asked as he looked at low-level essence stones that were stuck in the walls of the low-level mine like glowing diamonds. Cedar walked deeper into the mine cave and nodded his head. A normal peak-level essence stone mine can easily produce around 10 million high-level essence stones a year. If you consider all the mines present here, you can say that we get more than 300 million high-level essence stones every year from all the mines present here. 300 million high-level essence stones. Evan sucked in a breath of cold air when he heard Cedar and looked at him in shock. If these mines can produce around 300 million high-level essence stones every year, then doesn't it mean you guys are filthy rich? Well, if you are talking about the essence stones, then yes, Dryads can be considered one of the richest races in the entire Utopia, but Cedar said and smiled bitterly. If you are talking about other resources, then we are at the bottom of the list. Bottom of the list? Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar and asked in a confused voice, "Can't you use the essence stones produced by these mines to buy the resources that you need?" No offense, but considering the low population of the Dryads, it shouldn't be difficult to provide them with enough resources, using the 300 million high-level essence stones that these mines produce, right? It's not that easy, Cedar said and shook his head. The essence stones produced by the world tree are a little different from normal essence stones. All the essence stones produced by it carry a small amount of the aura of the world tree. If we directly use these essence stones, there is a certain level of chance that people will find out that these stones originated from the world tree, and it will be dangerous for us. Cedar paused after saying this and added after a moment, "In order to use the essence stones produced by the world tree, we have to remove the aura of the world tree from them. Only people who are rank 4 or above can remove the aura of the world tree using their law power. So even though we have hundreds of millions of essence stones, the original amount that we can use each year to buy resources is not that high." Evan frowned upon hearing Cedar and didn't know what to say. Their situation was really strange. They have enough wealth that can make anyone envious, but they can't use this wealth because of the danger of being discovered by others. What a mess, Evan thought to himself as he rubbed his eyebrows. Suddenly, he remembered something and asked in a confused voice, "By the way, earlier you said that the powers of the world tree are currently sealed. What do you mean by that?" Cedar smiled bitterly upon hearing Evan and asked in a gloomy voice, "Have you seen the world tree that is inside Grandpa Silven's cave?" Yes, Evan nodded hearing Cedar, recalling the small tree that he had seen when he met Silven after entering the sealed world. "Since you have seen the world tree, then you must have seen the formation that surrounds it as well, right?" Evan once again nodded hearing Cedar and suddenly thought about something. "Are you saying that the formation is the thing that is restricting the powers of the world tree?" Yes, Cedar nodded, hearing Evan, and said in a helpless tone, if we don't restrict the powers of the world tree using that formation, other people will be able to sense it's out of the dash world aura, and we will be discovered despite being inside the sealed world. So that formation is actually a sealing formation. Evan said inwardly, surprised that the formation he saw around the world tree was actually for sealing its powers. What will happen if the powers of the world tree are completely unsealed? Evan asked Cedar after a moment. Cedar smiled warily and shook his head upon hearing Evan's question. Honestly, I don't know. I had asked Grandpa Silven in the past, but he told me to become strong enough to unseal the powers of the world tree by myself, without worrying about other people, and see for myself. Evan looked at Cedar and couldn't help but smile, feeling the determination in his voice. Well, I hope you soon become strong enough and unseal its powers, as I also want to see what kind of powers are hidden inside the world tree. Cedar just smiled upon hearing Evan and didn't say anything. This place should be right for you. What do you think? Cedar asked after walking into the low-level mine for a few minutes. Evan felt the world essence around him and noticed that the density was way higher than the essence formation room in his house. He looked deeper into the cave and noticed that the density and amount of the world essence were even higher in the deeper areas. If I cultivate here, I should be able to reach the mid-level in 10 days, Evan thought, and nodded his head at Cedar. I think this place is good enough. Since that's the case, you can use this place. I will also be cultivating in one of the mid-level mines for the time being. Contact me once you reach the mid-level, Cedar said, hearing Evan, and left the cave. Evan watched Cedar leaving the cave and felt the world essence around him. Let's begin, he muttered and sat down on a side platform in the cave. The moment Evan sat down and closed his eyes, his primordial monarch core started to spin, and the world essence rushed towards him from all directions. Sensing the amount of world essence that his core was absorbing, Evan couldn't help but smile. I might not even need 10 days at this rate, he said as his core absorbed the world essence. Suddenly, an idea came into Evan's mind and his eyes lit up. If this works, my absorption speed will increase even more, he said in a low voice, and some strange thorn-filled vines came out of his hands and pierced the walls of the cave. Energy Devouring. Chapter 769. As the devouring vines pierced the walls of the Essence Stone mine, the Essence Stones stuck inside the walls started to turn into dust, and all of their world essence was absorbed by the vines. Evan's primordial monarch core was already absorbing the world essence from the surroundings like a black hole. With the addition of the world essence provided by the devouring vines, Evan felt as if his core was facing a tsunami of world essence. At first, he found it hard to handle the amount of world essence his core was absorbing, but after a few hours, he became familiar with the absorbing process. As time passed, Evan realized that the devouring vines were not only absorbing the world essence from the essence stones, but even the walls of the mine were filled with rich world essence, and he was absorbing the world essence of the walls as well. In just a single day, he devoured nearly 2 million low-level essence stones from the mine. As a result, his core progressed by 8%. He was at the 68% mark when he entered the mine, and now he was at the 76% mark after 24 hours. The speed at which his core was progressing was simply ridiculous. I will reach mid-level in another 3 days at this rate, but Evan muttered and looked around him with a twitching mouth. The walls of the mine that were glowing with essence stones earlier were now looking like normal cave walls, and there was not a single essence stone in an area of 500 meters around Evan. I thought I would just absorb a few thousand essence stones, but I underestimated the appetite of my core, Evan said inwardly, and rubbed his chin. He wasn't worried that he had ruined the mine, because he could feel the world essence was still flowing through the walls of the mine, and new essence stones were slowly forming. In just a few months, all the essence stones that he had devoured from the mine would be reformed. Besides, I have enough essence stones now, so I will give back Cedar all the essence stones that I am using, Evan said, and took out a storage ring from his shadow storage. In the storage ring, there were 500 high-level essence stones, in other words, 5 million low-level essence stones. He poured the 500 essence stones in front of him, making the entire cave shine with a blue color. After pouring the essence stones in front of him, he picked them up and threw them towards the walls of the mine, affixing them into the mine walls. The moment the essence stones came into contact with the mine walls, the world essence flowing through the walls started to move towards them. Once all the 500 essence stones were stuck in the mine walls, Evan once again used the energy devouring skill. The effect of high-level essence stones was even better than the low-level essence stones. Because of this, Evan's progressing speed increased once again. If I had known that I could use energy devouring on essence stones, I would have used it long ago while I was cultivating in the essence formation room, Evan muttered as his core devoured the essence stones from the surroundings. After killing the S-rankers who came with Kale, Evan had used energy devouring on one of them. But when he tried to absorb the body using energy devouring, his primordial monarch core rejected the energy of the body and didn't absorb it. At that time, Evan thought he might not be able to increase the rank of his core using the energy devouring skill anymore. However, when Evan saw the essence stone mine, for some reason, he suddenly felt like using the energy devouring skill on the essence stones, and to his surprise, it worked. I wonder why I can't increase the rank of my core by absorbing the bodies through the energy devouring skill, Evan muttered, thinking about the meat of the rank 2 monster that he and Cedar had eaten before their fight against Kale. The rank of my core had increased a little after I ate that meat, so logically speaking, the rank of my core should have increased after I absorbed the body using energy devouring, but my core rejected that energy, Evan said, while absorbing the world essence, and shook his head. Although he was really curious why his core rejected that energy, he didn't think too much about it for the time being, and focused on his core. Originally, Evan needed 3 more days to reach the mid-level, but because of devouring the high-level essence stones that contained even purer world essence, he reached the limit of beginner level just after 2 days. As his core reached the limit of beginner level, it started to shake. Powerful energy fluctuations emanated from Evan's body and spread in all directions. Rumble. The energy fluctuations coming out of his body were so powerful that the walls of the mine started to rumble, and small cracks appeared on them. Bang! Suddenly, Evan's core stopped shaking, and a wave of powerful energy erupted from it. Evan felt a piercing pain all over his body, and a deep frown appeared on his face. The energy that came out from his core strengthened his body, and the amount of world essence inside his body started to increase. The energy fluctuations coming out of his body increased even more, and large cracks spread throughout the walls. Evan noticed the abnormality caused by his breakthrough, and immediately used his skill, Shadow World. A black dome emerged from his body and covered a small area around him. The Shadow World completely blocked the energy fluctuations coming out from his body, and the walls of the mine stopped shaking. Because of the passive authority blessed by light that Evan had acquired from Elijah, using the second effect of the Growth Link skill, the consumption of all of his skills decreased by half, so he did not feel any pressure like before. While using the Shadow World skill, Evan's breakthrough lasted for around 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the black dome inside the mine disappeared, and Evan's figure was revealed. His face was a little pale, and his body was drenched in cold sweat, because of using the Shadow World skill for 10 minutes. Although his face was pale and even the aura around him was unstable, Evan smiled widely and clenched his fist. Finally, mid-level rank 1, he muttered and stood up from the ground. Chapter 770. Name: Evan. Race: Eltheran. Rank: mid-level rank 1 core evolver. Bloodline: Doombringer, partially awakened. Strength: 72. Agility: 77. Endurance: 71. World Essence: 90. Stamina: 75. Intelligence: 70. Primordial Shadow Energy: 80. Current understanding of the conceptual energy of Void: 10.001%. Skills: Shadow Walk, Shadow Storage, Dimensional Shadow Bullet, Ice Chains, Wind Manipulation, Mind Suppression, Shadow Shrouding Wings, Temporal Velocity, Energy Devouring, Thunder Tempest, Flicker Step, Sonic Resonance, Ember Vitality, Regeneration, Mid-Level Poison Resistance, Death Ring, Ice Spear, Wind Walk, Summon Lick, Soul Beacon, Soul Severance, Fireball, Blinding Light, Lightning Arrow, Gaze of Monarch, Psychic Soul Realm, Shadow Mark, Abyssal Vortex. Physique: Shadow Monarch Physique. Title: Rule Breaker, Creator of the Primordial Shadow Realm, the Cursed One, Owner of the Eldoria City. Class: Shadow Necromancer. Class skills: Shadow Resurrection, Shadow Save, Shadow Senses, Shadow Possession, Shadow Nails, Death Transfer, Growth Link, Soul Absorption, Soul Fusion, Shadow Clone, Shadow World. Racial skill: Reaper's Wrath. Authorities: Master of Shadows, Death Guardian. My stat points nearly doubled after the breakthrough, and I can still increase them, Evan said while looking at his status window. When he was in Star City, he had checked the limit of his stat points, and discovered that he can reach 150 points, while being a rank 1 core evolver. Evan wasn't all that surprised after discovering this, as he was already expecting it. He even checked the limit of some of his shadow undeads, and was quite shocked that most of them had a limit of 60 points, and some of them were even more ridiculous. The one who surprised him the most was actually Gobu, who had a limit of 75 points, even higher than Elijah, who had a limit of 72 points. I had left most of my shadow undeads in the training ground of the house, Evan muttered as his eyes flashed. Some of them were already very close to reaching mid-level at that time, and now that I broke through, they should also be able to reach the mid-level of rank 1. Although Evan's shadow undeads became different entities after reaching rank 1, and all of them can now cultivate by themselves, Evan discovered that there is still a restriction placed on them. The rank of their core can't reach higher than the rank of his core. For example, now that Evan is a mid-level rank 1 core evolver, his shadow undeads can also reach the mid-level rank 1 by cultivating. But if they want to reach the peak of the rank 1, they will have to wait until Evan reaches the peak of the rank 1. Even if they met all the requirements to become peak rank 1 core evolvers, they wouldn't be able to advance until Evan becomes a peak rank 1 core evolver himself. The same goes for the shadow undeads who are of higher rank than him. Now that Evan is a mid-level rank 1 core evolver, he can create beginner level rank 2 shadow undeads. Once he creates a beginner level rank 2 shadow undead, that shadow undead will not be able to advance to mid-level rank 2 until Evan becomes a mid-level rank 2 core evolver himself. Although he was a little disappointed after knowing this restriction, Evan did not care too much about it, because he had enough confidence in his progressing speed. With the speed of his advancement, he was sure that this restriction wouldn't hinder him. After looking at his status window for a moment, Evan closed it. He did not receive any skill or authority after advancing, but he was already expecting this, so he wasn't surprised. It's good that I used the Shadow World skill on time, otherwise, Evan said with a twitching mouth, as he looked at the mine walls that were cracked due to the energy fluctuations caused by his breakthrough. He took out a few thousand higher level essence stones, and threw them into the wall cracks. As the higher level essence stones came into contact with the cracks on the walls, the world essence flowing inside the walls moved towards the stones, and new essence stones started to form inside the wall cracks. Evan sighed in relief when he noticed the mine was still forming the essence stones, and took out the communication crystal to contact Cedar. It's time for me to finally create new shadow undeads, and increase all of my stat points to the limit of mid-level rank 1, Evan muttered as he walked towards the exit of the mine. He called Cedar using the communication crystal, and told him that he was done with his breakthrough. Cedar was stunned when he heard Evan was already at the mid-level just after 3 days, and thought he was messing with him. Now that I am a mid-level rank 1 and some of my shadow undeads also reach mid-level, I should be able to face beginner level rank 2 monsters without using Shadow Possession and Death Guardian authority, right? Evan muttered as he put away the crystal after informing Cedar. As he thought about the beginner level rank 2 monsters, he couldn't help but sigh. I only need Blood Soul crystals to evolve Carnage into a rank 1 artifact. If its evolution goes according to what I am thinking, Evan said, and felt his blood boil in excitement. He soon left the Essence Stone mine and came out of it. After coming out, he looked around but did not find Cedar. He should be coming out soon, Evan said, and looked at the topmost cave, where Cedar said the core of the closed world was located. I wonder what this world core is, Evan thought and sighed lightly. Even though he wanted to go inside and take a look, he knew that it was impossible. While he was looking at the closed cave, a person suddenly appeared behind him out of nowhere. Feeling the sudden presence behind him, Evan immediately wanted to attack. But before he could, he heard an indifferent voice, and his body stiffened. You ruined the entire Essence Stone mine. Chapter 771. Inside the Primordial Shadow Realm, The world essence was in a complete mess and was rushing in a certain direction. The ground was shaking, and all the creatures were running away with a look of horror on their faces. Powerful energy waves flowed everywhere, carrying enough power that could instantly kill even normal rank 3 core evolvers. Amid the chaos, high in the dark sky of the primordial shadow realm, stood a woman with 2 white angel-like wings. She had long white hair, golden eyes, and wore a long silver dress. Looking at the ongoing chaos around her, the woman's golden eyes flashed, and a silver-colored barrier covered an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, halting the energy waves from spreading throughout the shadow realm. The chaos persisted for nearly 10 hours before the energy waves began to calm down, and the ground of the shadow realm stopped shaking. After a few minutes, the energy waves that had wreaked havoc throughout the shadow realm completely disappeared. However, the woman who deployed the barrier didn't remove it. At this moment, a powerful aura suddenly erupted, and the entire silver-colored barrier started to shake. The woman with wings frowned as she tried to strengthen the barrier. But despite her efforts, cracks started to appear on the silver barrier, leaking some of the aura that the barrier was stopping. Rumble. The mountains inside the shadow realm started to crumble, and deep crevices formed on the ground. Just a silver of the aura leaking from the barrier was enough to destroy everything in its path. Fortunately, the destructive aura coming out from the barrier did not last long and disappeared after a few seconds. The white-haired winged woman sighed in relief when the destructive aura disappeared and finally removed the barrier. As she removed the barrier, a woman with 2 dragon-like horns and wings flew out. Her body was covered in shining black scales, and the aura around her was still a little unstable. But compared to the previous destructive aura that leaked out from the barrier, it was completely under control. Congratulations, Lady Anastasia. The woman with white wings bowed and said in a respectful voice. Thanks for stopping the rampaging energy, Florita, Anastasia said in an embarrassed voice, and stopped some distance away from the winged woman. Anastasia used to be a peak world level expert in the past, but because of an accident, her rank fell to the mid-level. After the Shadow Realm evolved, she felt she could reach the peak of the world level again, and just as she expected, because of the evolution of the Shadow Realm, she easily reached the peak of the world level once again. Because it was not a breakthrough, but instead a recovery of her original rank, Anastasia thought it would not affect her surroundings. But the primordial shadow energy that filled the atmosphere of the Shadow Realm not only helped her recover her rank, it even helped her become stronger than her past self, which is why she wasn't able to control her aura earlier. I didn't expect that the partial authority Master gave me over the Shadow Realm would help me surpass my previous limits, Anastasia thought inwardly and smiled. Where are those 2 idiots? She asked after a moment. They said they wanted to spar and went to some remote corner of the Shadow Realm, so that it wouldn't affect anyone. In other words, Anastasia said in a neutral voice. Yes, Volta is getting another beating from Draven, Florita said in a calm voice. That idiot, Anastasia shook her head and sighed. Although Draven can't use his full power yet, he is still a mid-level world expert. Why is that stupid Volta sparing with him? Florita did not say anything hearing Anastasia, and chose to remain silent. She felt like if she talked about Volta, her IQ would drop by a few points. Anyway, I knew both of them would act like Big Dash. Lady Anastasia, language, Florita interrupted Anastasia in a stern voice. Anastasia's body stiffened upon hearing Florita's stern voice, and she laughed dryly. I mean, I already knew they would act like idiots, which is why along with Draven, I chose to wake you up. I am honored that you trust me that much, but you should remember that I also can't use my full power yet. It doesn't matter. I chose you because you are perfect to manage things here in the Shadow Realm after I leave. When are you planning to leave, Lady Anastasia? Florita asked. I am leaving right now. I am back to the peak of the world rank, and you and Draven are already here, so there is no need for me to stay here any longer, Anastasia said in an excited voice, and flew away from there. Florita looked at Anastasia, who was flying away like an excited child, and sighed. She is hopeless, she said, and followed after her. Soon she caught up with Anastasia and asked, what should we do about the people who are outside? Are there new people outside? Anastasia asked with a frown on her face upon hearing Florita. Previously, there were just demons, but a few days ago, Some dragons also arrived, and now they are also guarding the entrance of the Shadow Realm, along with demons, Florita said in a cold voice, and her golden eyes turned purple for a split second. She really doesn't like the fact that some bastards are standing outside of their door. Dragons, Anastasia muttered and narrowed her eyes as she remembered some unpleasant things. It seems the news about the Shadow Realm already spread among many people, she said and shrugged her shoulders. Well, it doesn't matter because after the recent evolution of the Shadow Realm, all the Shadow Undeads are in the process of awakening, and once all of them wake up, it doesn't matter even if the entire Utopia knows about us. All the energy of the Shadow Energy Pond was used up in order to wake me and Draven, Florita said hearing Anastasia, and sighed. It will take quite some time before the Shadow Energy Pond recovers. If there was enough energy in it, we could have awakened all the top-level Shadow Undeads. Anastasia also felt it was a pity that the energy of the Shadow Energy Pond was used up, but she did not think too much about it. Since they are standing outside of our door like some stray animals, should I go out and give them a warning? Florita suddenly asked as her eyes flashed with a strange light. Hearing Florita, Anastasia looked at her and said in a teasing voice, "You want to do your job as the Angel of Death once again, huh?" Florita's mouth couldn't help but twitch when she heard Anastasia, and she looked away. "Oya, don't tell me you are embarrassed. Did you forget how you used to introduce yourself as the Angel of Deep quote?" Anastasia suddenly stopped talking when she noticed Florita was looking at her with a smile on her face. "Lady Anastasia, I just remembered there was someone who accidentally broke the soul bracelet that Master had spent a few years making, and put the blame on Volta. Coincidentally, I happened to see the real culprit who broke the soul bracelet. I wonder how Master will react when I tell him about the real culprit." Anastasia's body trembled when she heard Florita, and she immediately stopped talking. Florita looked at silent Anastasia and nodded her head. She couldn't tolerate it when people reminded her about her immature self, who used to act like a chunny. There is no need to act against the people who are outside right now. Master just came back to Utopia, and he still needs some time before he can integrate the Shadow Realm with his core. We will wait until he is strong enough before doing anything, Anastasia said as she landed in front of the castle. Florita landed along with her and followed her inside the castle. Soon both of them arrived in the throne room of the castle, where the core of the Shadow Realm was located. "You are going to leave your essence clone here?" Florita asked once they arrived in the throne room. "I can't go out before transferring the partial authority that I have, so I am going to create an essence clone and transfer the authority to it, so that I can leave," Anastasia said as she started to create her essence clone. Florita frowned when she heard Anastasia and asked in a concerned voice, "Will you be alright after making this essence clone?" In order to make an essence clone that can handle the pressure of the partial authority, you will have to use a large amount of your power. "Well, I will be weakened and won't be able to use my full power after making this essence clone, but I don't think there will be any problem," Anastasia said, and soon an essence clone of her appeared in the room. Anastasia's aura weakened greatly after she created the essence clone, but she didn't care about it, and let her essence clone sit on a small throne that was inside the throne room. Once the essence clone sat down on the small throne, Anastasia closed her eyes, and a black ray shot out from her forehead, going inside the body of the clone. A small black mark appeared in the center of the clone's forehead once the black ray went inside its body. Seeing the black mark on the clone's forehead, Anastasia sighed in relief, and a smile appeared on her face. "Lady Anastasia, you transferred more than half of your power to this essence clone. Are you sure this is all right?" Florita asked with a deep frown on her face. "I can't transfer the partial authority to anyone else even if I want to, so this is the only way I have if I want to leave the Shadow Realm," Anastasia said in a calm voice and smiled. "Besides, even though I transferred more than half of my power, I am still strong enough to protect myself from any threats." Florita looked at Anastasia for a few seconds, and finally nodded her head. "How are you going to leave? There might be some powerful people hiding outside. If you were in your prime, there would be no one in the entire Utopia who could find you, but in your current state." Anastasia looked at her clone who was sitting on the throne and smiled. "Don't worry, using the power of the Shadow Realm, my clone can send me millions of kilometers away from the portal of the Shadow Realm." As Anastasia said, the black mark on the forehead of the essence clone started to glow. The primordial shadow energy and the world essence of the shadow realm moved, and a black aura covered Anastasia's body. This Florita was stunned when she saw what was happening, and looked at Anastasia's clone with a shocked expression. This is the new ability that was unlocked after the evolution of the Shadow Realm. Now the person who has partial authority over the Shadow Realm can use its power to do some simple things like this, Anastasia said, and her body started to disappear. With the help of this new ability, it will be easier for you to defend the Shadow Realm if someone forcefully enters inside. Florita came back to her senses hearing Anastasia and nodded her head. I will come back with Master once he becomes strong enough to integrate the Shadow Realm into his core. Please take care of yourself and don't do anything reckless, Florita reminded Anastasia in a serious voice. Anastasia nodded hearing Florita, and her body was engulfed by the primordial shadow energy and the world essence. The mark on the clone's forehead flashed, and Anastasia disappeared from the Shadow Realm. Chapter 772. Guardian my ass. That guy was definitely a thug, Evan cursed as he walked with Cedar. You were the one who sucked all the essence stones and even the world essence that was flowing through the walls of the mine, so as the guardian of the essence mines, it is natural that he took compensation from you, Cedar said, while trying his best to control his laughter. That was just a low-level mine, a damn low-level mine, but he took 50,000 high-level essence stones from me, Evan said with a twitching mouth, feeling as if he was robbed. Cedar just shook his head hearing Evan and tried to change the subject. So, what are you planning to do now? Do you want to use the law formation? Evan took some deep breaths to calm down, and answered Cedar's question. I am planning to go out of the closed world to hunt some beginner-level rank 2 monsters. Planning to go out. Cedar frowned when he heard Evan, as he didn't expect him to be planning to leave the closed world. Although it has been more than a month since they stole the Enlightenment Stone, it was still not a good idea for them to leave the closed world for the time being. No one should know about my real appearance as I was wearing the mask even before leaving the Dark Forest. But Evan wore the mask before entering the Star City, and the vampires we saw in the Star City definitely saw Evan's real appearance when we left the Dark Forest, so there is a small possibility that Lucian and others already knew about his real appearance. Cedar thought inwardly and narrowed his eyes. When Evan noticed a frown on Cedar's face, he understood what he was thinking, so he reassured him in a calm voice. I will change my appearance, and I am not planning to leave the Dark Forest, so it should be fine. Cedar thought for a moment when he heard Evan and eventually nodded his head. Well, it should be fine as long as you don't leave the Dark Forest. Are you also coming with me? Evan asked once Cedar agreed. Yes, I have used up my stock of rank 2 meat, so I also need to hunt some monsters, Cedar replied. Evan smiled when he Cedar and nodded his head. That's good, since you are coming. I don't need to worry about finding rank 2 monsters, as you must know about the areas where we can find them, right? I do know about a few areas where we can find rank 2 monsters, but are you sure you want to fight against them? Cedar asked in a serious voice. Although Evan killed Kale, who was at the peak of rank 2 in front of him, Cedar knew that it was not easy to use that kind of power. Don't worry. I should be fine as long as I don't mess with a mid-level rank 2 or a higher level monster, Evan said when he heard Cedar. While talking with Cedar, Evan used his shadow senses and sent an order to all of his shadow undeads, who were in the training ground of his house. When Evan's shadow undeads received his order, all of them stopped training and moved towards his shadow clone, whom he had left in the training ground, along with his other shadow undeads. Evan's clone used the shadow storage skill, and all the shadow undeads who were in the training ground went inside. As the shadow storage of the clone was connected with Evan's shadow storage, all of the shadow undeads instantly arrived in his shadow storage. This connection is quite useful, Evan thought inwardly, when all of his shadow undeads instantly arrived in his shadow storage. Cedar and Evan flew away from the barren land where the essence stone mines were located, and went towards the teleportation building they had used last time to leave the closed world. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach the teleportation building. Once inside the building, Cedar selected the location, and both of them disappeared from the closed world. In the inner area of the dark forest, at the top of a towering lush tree, a white light flashed, and Evan and Cedar appeared there. Both of them had already changed their appearance before leaving the closed world, and were currently looking like normal humans. Hide your aura, Cedar immediately instructed Evan after appearing at the top of the tree. Hearing Cedar, Evan immediately concealed his aura and scanned their surroundings with a vigilant expression. This is the inner area of the Dark Forest, mostly inhabited by Rank 2 and Rank 3 monsters. We're currently at the edge of the inner area where most of the Rank 2 monsters reside, Cedar explained. Although this area should be relatively safe, we still need to be cautious, as Rank 3 monsters occasionally come here to hunt weaker prey. Evan nodded in understanding hearing Cedar, and refrained from using his spiritual senses to scout the surroundings. I need to create some small shadow undeads similar to insects, as they would be perfect for scouting. But I've never encountered any monsters like them, Evan said inwardly, as he and Cedar descended from the top of the tree. I know a perfect place where we can find a beginner-level Rank 2 monsters. Let's go, Cedar said after reaching the forest floor, and they ventured deeper into the woods. Cedar was familiar with this area of the Dark Forest, as he often came here to hunt monsters, so they didn't encounter any creatures while moving. In just a few minutes, they delved deeper into the forest, and soon Cedar stopped in front of a cave. It seems that guy is still here, Cedar remarked, looking at the footprints just outside of the cave. What kind of monster lives here? Evan asked in a curious voice, seeing the footprints. Cedar smiled upon hearing Evan and said in a light voice, "It is the cave of the monster called Bull Bear." Chapter 773. What are these? Evan asked as Cedar took out a bunch of berries like fruits from his storage ring, and threw them in front of the cave. Bullbears like to eat these berries. We should be able to lure it out of the cave using them, Cedar answered, looking at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, he thought about something and frowned. By the way, the defense of the bullbears is very strong. It won't be easy for you to kill it. If you want, we can look for a different beginner-level Rank 2 monster with weaker defense. High defense. Evan raised an eyebrow when he heard Cedar and fell deep into thought. The reason he wanted to fight against a beginner-level Rank 2 monster was not only because he wanted to create Rank 2 shadow undeads, but also because he wanted to test his current powers against a strong opponent. Shadow Possession and Death Guardian can give him enough power to fight against Rank 2 core evolvers, but these are something that can only be used in an emergency situation. The cooldown time for the Shadow Possession skill is 10 hours, meanwhile, the Death Guardian skill can only be used once a week. These two things are not something that he can use on a whim. He will soon enter the Tomb of the Ancient, so Evan wanted to test his powers against a beginner-level Rank 2 monster, without using these two skills to get a good grasp of his powers. Honestly, he wasn't sure if he could kill a Rank 2 monster without using his Shadow Possession or the Death Guardian authority. Rank 2 evolvers are way stronger than Rank 1 evolvers, and the last time he was able to kill Kale easily was only because of the passive effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill, Shadow Possession skill, and the Death Guardian authority, which made it impossible for him to get hurt by any attack. If not for the effect of the Death Guardian authority, it would have been very difficult for him to kill Kale. After he used his zone, he was able to avoid Kale's zone completely because of the Death Guardian authority. If he wants to kill a beginner-level Rank 2 monster without using his most powerful skills, he will have to do a surprise attack to not give Bullbear any chance, and kill it as soon as possible. But Cedar is saying it has a very high defense, so Evan wasn't sure if his attacks would work on it. Let's give it a try. Even if I can't beat it, I can use my undeads to safely escape from it, Evan said after a moment and looked at Cedar. Cedar shrugged his shoulders hearing Evan and didn't say anything else. It won't be difficult for me to save him, even if something happens during the fight, Cedar thought, and both of them waited for the bullbear to come out of the cave. The berries that Cedar used were very effective, and just after a few minutes of waiting, Evan noticed some movement in the cave. Soon, a brown, 3-meter-tall monster with 2 horns on top of its head walked out of the cave on its 4 hooves. The look of the monster was similar to a bear, but unlike the chubby body of a bear, the monster's body was muscular like a bull, and a powerful aura was emitted from its body. Just looking at the bulging muscles of the bullbear, Evan couldn't help but gulp down his saliva, and for a moment, he thought about searching for another monster to test his bravery. Go ahead, you can fight freely without worrying about other monsters. I will create some earth walls around this area, so that other monsters won't be able to sense the fight, Cedar said in a low voice as he patted Evan's shoulder. Evan's mouth twitched uncontrollably hearing Cedar, and he took a deep breath. "Here goes nothing," he said inwardly, and took a step towards the bull bear, who had just come out of its cave. Wind walk. Using the wind walk skill, Evan instantly appeared above the head of the bull bear. The moment Evan appeared above it, the bull bear sensed his presence and lifted its head at lightning speed, locking its deep yellow eyes with Evan's cold black eyes. Before the bull bear could take a proper look at Evan's face, the surroundings around it darkened. Shadow World. Evan used the Shadow World to its full power, and a black dome instantly covered an area of 300 meters. Roar. The bull bear roared when its surroundings darkened, and noticed Evan gathering his strength to punch down its head. When the bull bear noticed Evan was planning to smash its head, it was already too late for it to dodge. Although it was too late for it to dodge, the bull bear didn't panic, and instantly created a shield around its head to defend against the punch. Evan smirked when he noticed the shield around the bull bear's head, and, at the last second, changed his position from punching down at the bull bear's head to punching upwards towards the empty sky. The bull bear was baffled when Evan suddenly changed his position to punch towards the empty sky, and didn't know what he was planning. Just as the bull bear was confused because of Evan's strange move, Evan suddenly disappeared from above its head. Teleportation. Utilizing the power of the Shadow World, Evan materialized between the four hooves of the bull bear, positioning himself directly under the creature's stomach. Power Aura. Temporal Velocity. Wind Manipulation. Sonic Resonance. Evan used many of his skills at the same time, and a terrifying aura erupted from his body. He was already in the position to punch upwards even before appearing below the bull bear's stomach. So by the time the bull bear realized what was happening, it was already too late. The powerful sonic vibrations emanated from Evan's fist like the roar of a wild beast. "Heya heya!" Evan shouted loudly and threw more than 100 punches into the middle of the bull bear's stomach in less than a second. Evan's punches made contact with the bull bear's stomach and boom! Roar! The bull bear roared in pain, and its giant body was sent flying toward the sky like a rocket. The momentum at which the bull bear moved toward the sky was so fast that the top of the Shadow World shattered, and the bull bear continued to ascend higher into the sky. The bull bear coughed out large mouthfuls of blood in midair, and felt as if its inner organs were crumbling one by one. Evan was using the Temporal Velocity skill, so he watched the bull bear ascending high in the sky in slow motion. Green wind circled around his feet, and in an instant, he arrived above the bull bear, who was still ascending toward the sky. Abyssal Vortex. Evan said in a cold voice after appearing above the bull bear, and a dark brown vortex, flashing with different colors of light, opened in front of him. The moment the vortex opened, tens of different kinds of attacks shot out from it, and struck the bull bear, who was still in the mid-sky, and pushed it down towards the ground. Chapter 774. Abyssal Vortex, Unique Skill. Upon activation, conjures a swirling vortex of darkness, using the primordial shadow energy that absorbs and nullifies incoming attacks. The user can store the nullified attacks inside the Abyssal Vortex, and use them to attack their enemies. Similar to the Shadow World skill, Abyssal Vortex is the skill Evan received after becoming a rank 1 core evolver. At first, it was a skill named Shadow Vortex, but due to the influence of the primordial shadow energy, the Shadow Vortex evolved into Abyssal Vortex. Inside the Abyssal Vortex, Evan had stored tens of attacks from his Shadow Undeads. Although all of those attacks were beginner level rank 1 attacks, they were still not something that a beginner level rank 2 monster could completely ignore. Normally, it would have been a piece of cake for the bull bear to stop all the attacks that Evan launched at it through the Abyssal Vortex. But because of Evan's earlier attack, that nearly destroyed the bull bear's internal organs, the bull bear wasn't able to stop the attacks that came out from the Abyssal Vortex, and was struck by them. Lightning, fire, earth, different kinds of elements clashed together and turned into something chaotic that exploded upon coming into contact with the bull bear, sending it crashing towards the ground. The bull bear roared in pain as its body flew towards the ground, staining a small area of the sky in the red color of its blood. Seeing the bull bear crashing down towards the ground, Evan didn't relax, as he knew the defense and vitality of the bull bear were its strong points. Before the bull bear crashed to the ground, Carnage shot out from Evan's shadow storage, and he caught it. He lifted Carnage using one hand and positioned himself in a throwing stance, aiming Carnage towards the falling bull bear. The muscles of his hand bulged out, and he threw Carnage towards the falling bull bear like a spear. Gravity manipulation. Just before throwing Carnage, He used the gravity manipulation skill to its full power, increasing the weight of Carnage to its absolute limit. Rumble. Evan was nearly 1,000 meters high in the sky, so when he threw Carnage using his full strength and gravity manipulation skill, the sky started to rumble as if something terrifying was about to happen. Carnage turned into a streak of black light and descended towards the bullbear like a meteorite. Cedar had created tens of earth walls in the large area of the dark forest the moment Evan started his fight, although they were completely useless until now, as Evan sent the bullbear flying high in the sky the moment the fight started. But at this moment, when Cedar saw the streak of black light coming down and heard the rumbling of the sky, he felt a chill run down his spine and immediately created more earth walls. F***K. Does he want to call all the monsters of the dark forest here? Cedar shouted as the conceptual energy of the earth flowed out from his body without stopping. The speed at which Carnage came down from the sky was tens of times higher than the speed at which Bullbear was falling, so it struck the Bullbear in an instant. The muzzle of Carnage was in front, piercing the Bullbear's chest and increasing its falling speed by tens of times. Roar! The Bullbear roared in pain and horror, and before its mind could register the events that just happened, boom! With a thunderous crash, it collided with the earth, unleashing shockwaves that reverberated through the ancient trees. Cedar had created tens of earth walls in the surrounding area, but the moment Bullbear and Carnage crashed to the ground together, all the walls were blown away one by one. The ground collapsed, and the force of the collision sent shockwaves rippling outward, toppling trees in a domino-like fashion, and obliterating everything in its path. Rocks, once solid and immovable, shattered into countless fragments and scattered like confetti across the scarred landscape. A cloud of dust and debris engulfed the area of more than 10 kilometers, casting an ominous glow over the once verdant surroundings. Damn it, Cedar had to use his full power to minimize the damage, so that other monsters wouldn't get affected and come into the affected area. Evan looked at the giant rising dust cloud from the sky and panted heavily. It had only been a few seconds since the fight started, and he still had more than half of his world essence and primordial shadow energy left. However, taking so many actions and using many of his skills in such a short period placed a great burden on his body and depleted quite a bit of his stamina. That bastard is still alive even after being stabbed by Carnage, and crashing to the ground with such a powerful impact. Evan cursed when he sensed the weak life aura of the bullbear from the dust cloud and prepared to attack once again. Just as Evan was preparing to attack once again, roar! A roar filled with fury erupted from the dust cloud. Bang! The dust cloud was blown away, and a giant earth spear filled with chaotic energy, and releasing a sharp aura hurled towards Evan like a missile. Evan was still using the temporal velocity skill, but even under the effect of the temporal velocity skill, he found the earth spear as fast as lightning. The spear arrived in front of him in an instant and struck him in the chest, sending him flying even higher into the sky. Halfway through, the chaotic energy of the earth spear became completely unstable, and it detonated in a blinding flash of light. The explosion unleashes a torrent of raw power, sending shockwaves rippling outward in all directions. As the chaotic energy of the spear erupted, its intense heat vaporized clouds for tens of kilometers in every direction, leaving behind a gaping void in the sky. The shockwaves unleashed by the blast reverberated through the atmosphere, shaking everything in their path with seismic force. On the ground below, the already destroyed earth trembled under the onslaught of shockwaves, and the ground once again sank down. Cedar watched the shocking explosion with a blank expression on his face. He had been so occupied dealing with the shockwaves from Carnage and the bullbear's crash, that he hadn't even had a chance to intervene before the earth spear struck Evan and detonated. After a few seconds, Cedar snapped back to reality, and his face turned pale as he immediately sprinted towards the explosion. Damn, I was careless. I hope he's still alive, he said with a pale face as he hurried towards the location of the blast. Cedar had just started moving when he suddenly felt something, and looked at the place where he had been standing a moment ago. As Cedar glanced behind, he noticed a small white object on the ground that flashed, and Evan appeared there. Cedar was stunned when he saw Evan, and noticed that he was completely unharmed. Evan wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and gazed at the sky with lingering fear in his eyes. I would have been done for if I hadn't activated Astronaut's skill, Titania Resilience, in time to save myself. By using the second effect of Growth Link skill, Evan muttered inwardly, and looked at the spot where the bullbear had crashed with Carnage. Titanic Resilience, unique skill. When activated, you gain temporary invulnerability to all incoming damage, allowing you to easily ignore all attacks. However, you cannot attack or use other skills during this state. The invulnerability status will last for 10 seconds, and can only be used once every 3 hours. When Evan looked at the bullbear, he noticed its aura was extremely weak, indicating that the earlier attack was its last ditch effort to take him down with it. Evan also noticed Cedar's shocked expression after seeing him completely unharmed, but he wanted to finish the bullbear first, so he immediately moved towards its direction. In just a few seconds, Evan arrived at the place where the bullbear crashed, and found it in the middle of a wide crater spanning over 20 kilometers. The giant body of the bullbear was lying flat on the ground, with Carnage's muzzle still stuck in its chest. Carnage is just an S-rank artifact, but because of its indestructibility, there is not even a single scratch on it even after the earlier crash, Evan muttered as he landed some distance away from the bullbear. The bullbear glanced at Evan with hateful eyes, but it wasn't able to do anything, as most of its bones were already shattered, and its internal organs turned into mush after the earlier crash. I can already feel many monsters heading away because of the earlier commotion, Evan muttered and suddenly summoned Gobu. Kill it and use the reality-bending authority as I told you, he said in a serious voice after summoning Gobu. Gobu nodded his head upon hearing Evan and looked at the bullbear with a sinister expression. The bullbear got goosebumps all over its body when it saw Gobu's strange appearance. But Gobu didn't care about it, and crushed bullbear's heart through the wound on its chest. The life force of the bullbear was already too weak, so when Gobu crushed its heart, it died instantly. The moment the bullbear died, all the eyes on Gobu's pot belly lit up. Your shadow undead is using the reality-bending authority to bend reality in accordance with your will. A notification flashed before Evan's eyes. Chapter 775. Why your shadow undead is using the reality-bending authority to bend reality in accordance with your will. As the notification flashed in front of Evan's eyes, a wave of energy engulfed the dead bullbear's body. All the eyes on Gobu's pot belly lit up, and an object started to materialize in the air above bullbear's body. A wave of energy and a large amount of blood flew out of the bullbear's body and merged with the object. In just a few seconds, a ruby red stone formed above the dead bullbear's body. Once the stone was formed, Evan grabbed it and examined it. Soul Blood Crystal. It worked. Evan sighed in relief when he saw the name of the ruby red stone, and a smile appeared on his face. Reality Bending Authority. Upon activation, you can manipulate the probability of something happening to some extent. This authority can be used once every 2 months. The Reality Bending Authority can be evolved if certain conditions are met. A/N. I mentioned the Reality Bending Authority in Chapter 504, although at that time, its name was Reality Shifting. Upon the death of a monster, most of the time, its core will turn into energy and disappear at the moment of its death. But sometimes, the core of the monster doesn't turn into energy and stays intact even after the monster's death. The probability of a monster's core staying intact after its death is quite low, which is why the price of monster cores is very high. The Soul Blood Crystal is also something that forms upon the death of a monster. Sometimes, on very rare occasions, upon the death of a rank 2 or above rank monster, the energy of its monster core will not disappear, and will instead merge with the blood essence of the monster. Soul Blood Crystal forms when the energy of the monster core merges with the blood essence of the monster. The probability of the core's energy merging with blood essence is very low, which is why Evan wasn't able to find the Soul Blood Crystals in Star City. Using the Reality Bending Authority, Evan asked Gobu to increase the probability of Soul Blood Crystal formation to its maximum limit. Before leaving the closed world, Evan was not sure if his idea would work or not, but luckily, the Reality Bending Authority worked just fine, and he got 1 Soul Blood Crystal. This authority is really something else, Evan muttered and put away the Soul Blood Crystal. It's a pity that Gobu can only use it once every 2 months, and I need 2 Soul Blood Crystals to evolve Carnage. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a problem for me to evolve Carnage today. As Evan put away the Soul Blood Crystal, Cedar finally came back to his senses and approached him. He really wanted to know how Evan survived the attack of the bullbear, but he couldn't care less about it for the time being. as he could feel many monsters were coming towards them because of the commotion caused by Evan and Bulber's fight. "We need to leave right away," Cedar said in an urgent voice after approaching Evan. Evan could also feel many monsters were heading in their direction, so he nodded his head and put away Bulber's body inside his shadow storage. He called back Gobu inside shadow storage as well, and both of them immediately dashed away from there. A few minutes after Evan and Cedar dashed away, many monsters flooded the place where the bullbear was killed, and a fight to take over the territory of the bullbear broke out between the monsters. Evan and Cedar continued to run for quite some time, and stopped only when they couldn't feel the aura of any monsters. Damn, that was dangerous. If we had been caught by those monsters, they would have definitely ganged up on us instead of fighting against each other, Cedar said after stopping and looked at Evan as if he was looking at a monster. This time Evan did not behave abnormally during the fight like his fight against Kale. It was clear that he did not use the power that he had used last time, but even then he killed the bullbear. Although he knew Evan was able to kill the bullbear easily was mostly because of his surprise attack. In his eyes, it was still quite absurd that a mid-level rank 1 core revolver killed a beginner level rank 2 bullbear so easily. The skills that he used during the fight were also not normal, especially the skill that created the Black Dome, Cedar thought. Even with my spiritual power, I wasn't able to see what happened inside that Black Dome, and how that bullbear was sent flying high in the sky. Evan laughed dryly when he saw how Cedar was looking at him, and didn't know what to say. Honestly, even he was surprised because of how he killed the bullbear. He really thought that it would be a very tough fight, but his first attack, which nearly crushed the bullbear's organs, turned out to be more effective than he had thought. When Cedar saw Evan laughing dryly, he really wanted to beat him, but held himself back. "Cough, it seems we are out of danger now," Evan coughed and said when he saw Cedar was on the verge of lashing out. Cedar looked in the direction from where they just came and nodded his head. "Do you still want to hunt the monsters or go back now?" "Of course. I want to hunt a few more beginner level rank 2 monsters," Evan replied without hesitation when he heard Cedar. "And it will be even better if you can take me somewhere where we can find a group of beginner level rank 2 monsters," he added after a moment. A group of rank 2 monsters. Cedar's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he heard Evan, and he looked at him with dead eyes, wondering what was wrong with his mind. Does this guy think life is not exciting enough and want more adventure? Instead of a group of rank 2 monsters, why don't you go ahead and fight against the Overlord of the Dark Forest? Cedar really wanted to say this to Evan after hearing him, but managed to keep his cool. "May I ask why you want to meet the group of a rank 2 monster?" Evan already knew what Cedar was thinking, so he just smiled and took out the body of the bullbear from his shadow storage. After taking out the body, he first pulled Carnage out from its chest. Cedar looked at Carnage with raised eyebrows, and was surprised that an S-rank artifact didn't shatter after what Evan did with it. After putting away Carnage, Evan glanced at Cedar and took a deep breath. "Shadow Resurrection," he said, and used a few thousand souls as fuel, so that his skill wouldn't fail. The primordial shadow energy inside his core moved, and the body of the bullbear started to shake. When Cedar noticed what was happening, he remembered how Evan created a shadow undead after killing the people who came with Kale, and his eyes opened wide in shock. "Don't tell me he can even create rank 2. Cedar was in the middle of speaking when he saw a black-colored bullbear with purple eyes emerge from the dead bullbear's body and kneel in front of Evan. "Fu*K, what kind of broken skill is this?" Cedar couldn't help but swear, and looked at the kneeling bullbear with his eyes wide open. Suddenly, another thought came into his mind, and he looked at Evan with trembling eyes. "You want to fight against a group of beginner level rank 2 monsters? Don't tell me you can create more than one of these." Evan just smiled when he heard Cedar and didn't say anything. Although Evan didn't say anything, Cedar already knew the answer to his question, so he was completely speechless. "Let's go and find a group of beginner level monsters. With the help of this bad boy, it will not be difficult for me to hunt them down," Evan said as he patted Bullbear's shoulder, who was kneeling in front of him. Cedar took a deep breath when he heard Evan and just nodded his head. He looked at their surroundings, and after a moment started to move in a certain direction. Evan followed after Cedar, and glanced at the active effect of his Reaper's Wrath skill. Active effect. Once every 2 months, you can use the Soul Harvest mode of the Reaper's Wrath skill for 5 minutes. Under the effect of the soul harvest mode, there is a 20-5% chance that you will absorb the soul of the target you kill. If you successfully absorb the soul of the target, you will receive 10% stats from any one of the target's stats. The stat is chosen randomly. Note: in order to receive 10% of the target's stat points, the target you kill must be at least 2 levels above you. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The Silent Ruptor's out.